Katherine Edwards slid the red slider on the calendar to the 4th day and glimpsed out the window. She saw the bare tree in their yard swaying and Buddy the dog, who sat on a chain, climbing into a makeshift booth. "What are you staring at?" George Edwards, her husband, asked, walking into the kitchen. "Drinking again last night," thought Katherine, glancing at her husband's appearance. There were bruises and creases under his eyes. His nose was red, and in the greasy hair on his head, which had not seen shampoo for the second, if not third week, you could see your own reflection. Katherine stepped aside, making way for George. "Do we have anything?" The man grumbled grudgingly, walking over to the stove and beginning to open the lids on the pans one by one. "There is," she replied. "From what you like, borscht, sour cream in the refrigerator, bread in the cupboard if in the cupboard, holding ethmine for the poachant." Katherine herself hardly ate bread, limiting herself to 1 or 2 toasts a day. Recently exacerbated problems with the stomach gave about itself not cured 3 years ago ulcer. The doctor, prescribing her diet, recommended to limit her bread consumption as much as possible. The loaf in the cupboard above the stove had been bought almost a week ago. "Then I'll make my own tea." "Yes," George asked grudgingly. "Leave the kettle to me while I pour the borscht." He walked slowly over to the sink. There on a towel lay the freshly washed dishes. Edwards took a deep plate, pulled a ladle from the nightstand drawer, and began pouring the borscht in sour cream. "Serve," the man added in an orderly tone, and more salt. The submissive wife was forced to do everything her husband told her. She was frightened by the prospect of a repetition of the situation that had happened a year and a half ago, when George came home drunk. Hadn't come home sober last night either, but at least she hadn't heard it. When his foot crossed the threshold of their house, the hand on the clock was close to 2 o'clock in the morning, and Katherine was already dreaming. After putting the sour cream on the table, and then turning on the gas under the kettle, Katherine was finally able to leave the kitchen and move into the living room. There was a calendar hanging just in front of the doorway, leading from the kitchen to the hallway. And the woman turned her attention once again to the red slider marking the number 24. So once again she felt a strange longing for something unknown, and with this unpleasant feeling she went out into the corridor and then into the living room. There was a morning program on TV in which a young cook was telling recipes of various interesting dishes. Katherine sat down in a chair, took the remote control from the coffee table and turned it up a little louder. Age had damaged her eyesight, and to see the picture better, she had to wear glasses, which always hung around her neck. The guy on the screen was making Kiev-style cutlets, but instead of butter, he'd added cheese. Edwards knew the recipe, of course, but she tried to make herself believe that it was vital that she repeat it. Watching the actions of the cook and listening to his comments, Katherine mentally gradually immersed herself in the process of cooking cutlets. For a while it helped to forget about those urgent problems, about which the brain thought first of all. When the woman woke up and opening her eyes, the first thing she saw was the drunken body of her husband. Immediately she was hit in the nose by a nasty odor of booze. As she closed her eyes in total darkness, she silently prayed in the empty room that George would be okay. But a few minutes passed, and the source of all their problems re-emerged. George addressed her from the kitchen in a gruff voice. "Katherine," he shouted, "come here." "What do you want?" She muttered grudgingly, trying with all her might to cling to the fictional world in which she was carelessly cooking Kiev-style cutlets with cheese instead of butter. "Come here," I said. George reprimanded. "I've already sat down, and the kettle's boiling. Pour me some tea." The stuffed Kievsky cutlets, with cheese instead of butter, would have to wait. "That's all right," thought Katherine, rising from her chair. "And that young cook will cook something else after them." Suddenly there was a recoil in her back, and the woman bent slightly and grabbed her lower back with one hand. With a quiet groan, she stepped out into the hallway again, and then made her way into the kitchen. George was sitting at the table on the corner sofa eating borscht with sour cream. "The bread's gone sour. By the way," he said, "I'll have to buy another loaf." "You're wrong. It's not clear where you'll buy it," Katherine ventured to object. Her husband immediately stopped the spoon on its way to his mouth. Glancing sparingly at his wife, who was standing with her back to him, he still sucked in the borscht from the spoon, but kept his eyes down. "Are you going to go?" George asked. "Please, it's out of my way." Everything is out of your way, Katherine thought angrily. However, she was probably right. Her husband took a different route every day, and sooner or later, there was bound to be at least one grocery store in his path. But she didn't say anything out loud about it. "My back hurts," Katherine muttered as she poured the tea. "I'm not going to make it to the store." "You're going out today anyway, just in time to stop by the store." She set the mug of hot tea on the table. She turned around and walked toward the exit as she suddenly stopped. She didn't do it of her own free will, but something seemed to make her stop, and she didn't know what it was. Suddenly a great fear came over her, and her heart pounded faster. The feeling of anxiety, which had been at 0 a second ago, became more acute, and her level rose to 50% at least. All sorts of thoughts swirled in his head, but the scariest of them all Katherine chased away. And it didn't take more than a few seconds before it was over. The woman calmed down, and when the feelings, fears, anxieties faded away, she was able to breathe a full breath. After standing still for a few seconds, she continued toward the door. It wasn't until she stepped out of the kitchen that she realized exactly what it was. It happened often in the first few months after her husband had gotten drunk after that terrible accident. But then the attacks had almost completely stopped bothering her. She'd forgotten about them for a while. And then suddenly again, an attack of unreasonable fear and anxiety that made her already sick heart work for two. Still breathing heavily, Katherine returned to the living room and sat down in a chair. There was a commercial on the TV now, and she had to click the remote a couple times to make sure the cooking show wasn't over. It wasn't over, but her head was still busy thinking about the seizure that had just happened. Why was it happening again? Was her nervous system starting to malfunction too? She wasn't old enough to be actively giving up yet, but she was old enough for the first symptoms. But for a second, the woman thought about what had triggered these attacks a little over 3 years ago, and it suddenly hit her. She hadn't noticed this strange system before, but now she realized it. That is, every time she felt a heightened sense of fear and anxiety at precisely those moments when her husband was behind her back. The look, it was all about the look. Now Katherine was sure of it. Before, she would never have thought of feeling George's harsh, angry, and savage gaze on her back. But now there was no doubt in her mind. It was his gaze that made goosebumps run through her body whenever she caught it. "He hates me," Katherine thought to herself. And then she was pulled out of her thoughts by the dynamic loud splash screen of a cooking show. She even got a little excited at the thought that now she would once again be able to take her mind off her problems by immersing herself in the world of cooking with the young host. Reappropriating the glasses hanging from her chest, she stared at the television. In the world around her, the living room, the house, her husband, gradually began to merge, to turn into an impenetrable grayness, to lose its shape. At least for a few minutes a day, she could forget about her problems, completely immersed in watching the show. The old wooden doors creaked open. The large German shepherd on a chain, who lived in a makeshift box made of half-rotted boards, didn't make a sound. Outside, the wind gradually picked up, becoming more and more powerful. The lights in the house were off, and everyone was asleep. George staggered out, mumbled something inaudible, and then reached up to close the door. He was wearing old, worn-out sneakers that a neighbor had once given him out of necessity. Now he stood in the hallway with worn, old wallpaper. Holding onto the door frame, he tried to pull them off with his feet. It was only on the third attempt that he succeeded. The hallway, like the rest of the house, was dark. Slowly wandering down the hallway, the man didn't notice he had hit something hard wooden with his little finger. From the epicenter, pain quickly spread throughout his foot. Despite his drunken state, George felt the sharp pain in his foot fairly quickly. He screamed loudly. Instantly, the lights in the living room came on and Mary, George's mother, and with her, his older sister Olivia, popped out into the hallway. "What's wrong?" asked Mary excitedly, who was instantly awake. Standing in the hallway next to the ill-fated nightstand, crouched in pain, was her drunken 30-year-old son. And a few seconds after, the mother and sister in the hallway ran out and George's wife, Katherine. Following her, their son Sam came out, limping heavily on his left leg. "What's wrong?" Mary asked even more excitedly. She heard no answer. After a second attempt, She glanced at the clock hanging in the hallway. 2:30 a.m. Next to the clock hung a 1999 calendar. The runner was on the date September 30th, but in fact it was already October 1st. "Dad, what's wrong?" 8-year-old son Sam asked. "Will you all shut up?" shouted George angrily, grabbing his foot with his hand. Libya, George's sister, flinched. It was the first time she had ever seen her brother, who was a year and a half younger than her, in such a state. George had never made any harsh remarks to anyone, and had never spoken so rudely in front of his mother. "He reeks of booze a mile away," her sister muttered warily. Muffled and drunk, Katherine muttered, not believing her own words. "The time is already 2:30 at night. He stays at work until 11 at the most." "So what's the matter with you all?" George shouted even louder. The pain in his foot slowly began to subside. "There's no money, there's a lot of problems. And you're making a mess out of it. Have you turned on the TV at all? Have you seen what's going on in the streets?" So everyone stood there, not knowing what he was talking about. George's sister and his mother looked at each other in surprise. "George, what happened?" Katherine asked pitifully, standing behind her limp son and holding him by the shoulders with both hands. "Drew, why are you drunk? Why did you come home at 3:30 in the morning?" George sniffed his nose. He tried to straighten up, but he failed. He staggered, put one leg out wide to the side to keep from falling, and caught his hand on the wall. He wiped his left eye with the back of his finger, then said, "I'm out of a job, you fucking capitalists." It seemed that at that moment the man even sobered up. "The foreman came up to me today. Jack says, so and so. The company has a new owner, a private citizen. His mother says, 'George, you've been downsized. It's nothing personal,' she says, 'just business.'" For a second, Katherine even thought that he let a tear. After he finished speaking, he wiped the other eye and then sniffed again. Though whether he was crying or not was unclear, but there was a clear sense of intense despair in his voice. Katherine was shocked by the news of her husband's dismissal. "Confused," she said. "And what are we to do now?" "Nothing," George rudely interrupted her. "I'll look for another job." Edwards's wife was already replaying in her head the scenes of the family scavenging in the garbage, looking for scraps. For some reason, she immediately imagined them moving to live on the heating ducts. After all, the house had to be sold to pay for their son's expensive education. How they looked like elderly people at the age of 40, wearing rags, not washing for months for lack of opportunity. I imagined how they would stink of damp and poverty, and how they would have mice and fleas running up and down their torsos. She shuddered and returned to the real world, where she wasn't living on a heating duct and eating scraps. Back to a world where she was standing in the hallway of her old house and her drunken husband, who had been fired from his job today, was standing in front of her. And then the guilt hit. Guilt that on September 26th, when their marriage was exactly 10 years old, she had spent time in an expensive restaurant. Somewhere across the room, musicians were playing jazz music to order. On the table were expensive dishes and equally expensive alcohol. For the sake of the anniversary celebration, they had decided to spend 2/3 of the savings they had back on September 24th. George said that due to the purchase of the PERT plant, workers' wages would double. And for workers with more than 7 years of service, life was going to be really bright. But suddenly, someone spilled ink, and the whole colorful picture that Katherine had drawn in her head suddenly became a big black blot. Now they have practically no money. They can't go long without work. In all likelihood, she herself will have to go out to work, to entrust the upbringing of her son to an unknown person. "I told you so." Mary, a 55-year-old woman, suddenly exploded. "And I told you there's no reason to come here. No reason." She said the last phrase in a dickish voice. "There's no life here. No, you should have listened to your wife and moved into her parents' house." Katherine's parents had died years ago in a traffic accident. Driving on the highway to a neighboring town and overtaking a truck went into the oncoming lane. The father's car had some kind of brake problem, and when Edward Smith, Katherine's father, saw that they were oncoming truck, he immediately realized that they were finished. He hit the brake pedal as hard as he could. He began to turn the steering wheel back to get into his lane. The brakes weren't working properly, and the sand truck coming toward them was moving much faster than the car was braking. Head-on collision. 2 passengers died on the spot. Then student Katherine received a house from her parents. She was the only child in the family and had no problem taking over the parental living space. At the same time, when she studied at the university for a nurse in the city of Chicago, she met George Edwards. A few years after their marriage, she suggested that they move to the village where she had her own house. She justified this by the fact that there is better nature. There is a plot of land on which you can plant a vegetable garden. Yes, and a small son Sam will be much easier to grow up in rural conditions, so they moved. George immediately got a job as a driver on a construction site. He changed jobs many times and eventually settled in as a turner at the local factory. And now, as Katherine stood in the hallway across from her drunken husband and listened to her mother-in-law yell, she remembered Mary saying then, "How good of you to decide to move to the side. To the air is so clean there." "Told you so," George's mother kept shouting. "How many times have I told you? How many times have I told you that you shouldn't go along with that insolent girl?" "Ha, son, who am I talking to?" Staggering in place, George glared angrily at his mother. "Mom, calm down," her sister Olivia, who saw that Katherine might cry now, tried to reassure her. Yes, her nephew of 8 years old had already received a considerable dose of stress. Who doesn't lose their job these days? You tell me. George had it right. Rich people bought up businesses for next to nothing, and now they're controlling people's lives. He'll find a job. "George, don't worry." "Where are you going to go?" Mary started yelling at her daughter. "Tell me, where are you going to go?" "I'm talking business. He shouldn't have moved here with Katherine. We should have stayed in Chicago. I have connections there, and we could have gotten him a job. What's he going to do about it here?" Katherine looked over Sam's shoulder and looked at him. He was pretty freaked out by what was going on. She gripped his shoulders even tighter. Meanwhile, the fight between Mary, George, and Olivia continued. "Mom, please calm down," George's sister repeated. "Why are we discussing this now? It's Sam, after all?" Grandmother glanced at her frightened grandson and relented a little. But the boy's fearful look still didn't stop her completely. After looking at Sam, she turned to his father and asked, "What do you intend to do now? Come on, George, fill me in." George stared intently at the family across from him and studied each one individually. His foggy mind could still realize that he should not swear too much, otherwise he would frighten his wife and son even more. He also realized that he should not throw fists at them, because they were the closest people. But the anger still continued to boil inside him, and it had to go somewhere. "Looking for a job," he answered after a few seconds of silence. "Do you know I'm going to look for a job right now?" "Yes, Mom." Just like that, he kicked his foot, which made him stagger even more. The thud of the soles of his worn-out old shoes against the wooden floor was loud and sharp enough to startle Katherine and Sam, who had been scared out of their wits. Mary was even angrier after those words. She didn't know what she was angry at her son for getting drunk and coming home at 2:30 in the morning, at Katherine for being the reason her son had moved to the township and gotten a job as a lathe operator, from which he had been fired, or at the new owner of the factory, who had decided to reduce the number of full-time employees. In the end, she could also be angry at herself for being here and now at all. "Where are you going to go now?" "Fool," Grandma exclaimed. "Go to the couch and get some sleep. Olivia and I will sleep somewhere else." "Why the hell did you even come here?" George suddenly shrieked. "Who asked you here in the first place?" His anger was getting the better of him, and it was getting harder and harder to restrain himself with each passing second. "We're here for your anniversary," Olivia said quietly, trying to calm her brother, but to no avail. "You're the one who invited us," Mary added. "Have you forgotten? Look at that drunken body. You forgot that you called us to your anniversary with Katherine." George began to stagger even more, and he had to strain the arm he was holding against the wall to keep it from bending so he wouldn't fall. "To hell with all of you," he exclaimed and turned around. He caught his free hand on a small dresser in the living room. On the dresser were all sorts of different and unnecessary things. An old speaker, a small stack of glossy magazines, Katherine's used cosmetics, and some pamphlets and flyers. With his hand, which was floating freely in the air, George swept it all off the dresser in one awkward motion. It all flew down with a clatter. And Katherine and Sam shuddered again in surprise. Apparently, Mary and her daughter saw this accidental swing of the hand as a manifestation of anger, so they immediately rushed out of their seats and ran to George, who were trying to calm him down. Mary ran up behind him, grabbed the man by the forearm and tried to paw his arms. "Hold him down," shouted Olivia. The latter ran up to her a second later. Calm him down." Sam was shaking with fear. It was the first time he'd ever seen his father in this state, and that alone made him insanely scared. The child's stress was heightened by the fact that all this commotion had happened suddenly. He was woken up in the middle of the night, even though he had only fallen asleep about 40 minutes before. Since 10 p.m. that evening, he'd been twisting in bed trying to sleep. But the callus on his ankle on his left foot was very sore and abscessed. Katherine promised to get a doctor's appointment the next day, but in the meantime, she would just put some green on the callus. When Katherine saw how scared her son was, she became even more afraid. First, she was afraid that her drunken husband might hurt someone. Secondly, she was afraid for her son, because now he would definitely have trouble sleeping. And more importantly, trust in his father. As his mother and sister ran up to George, she felt incredibly sorry for her son, who had started second grade less than a month ago. He is still so young and already sees the terrible showdown. Katherine always thought that the family should be a place where you can take a break from all the problems, relax and be yourself, not pretending anything of themselves, and not embarrassed in front of anyone. And that's the attitude she always tried to realize to the maximum. But something went wrong. And now the family had become a place where all its members were getting a huge dose of stress. "Get off," yelled George. What followed was a wall of matting towards Olivia and Mary. "Piss off, I say." They tried to hold him down by force so he wouldn't go anywhere. He twisted his loins back and forth, straining his shoulders, trying to throw off the clinging female relatives. But he was too drunk to make these movements sharply and technically enough, and he could hardly stand on his own 2 feet. "You're not going anywhere now," Mary shouted and started pounding her hand on her son's back. "If you're going to stay home and sleep." Once again, an unrelenting torrent of profanity and motherly language poured from Edward's mouth. Olivia, meanwhile, was doing her best to restrain his right arm. His left arm was flailing around, trying to throw Mary off his back. Gradually, the living room filled with the acrid odor of cologne. Alcohol and some other unidentifiable fragrant substances were clearly audible. Katherine covered her son's eyes with one hand so that he could not see what his father, grandmother, and aunt were doing. With her other hand, she turned him to face her, and he immediately wrinkled his nose at the pain that sharply pierced his foot. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked pitifully, looking up at Katherine from below. His quiet voice was barely audible amidst the loud screams of Mary, Olivia, and George Edwards. "Mom, why is Dad drunk?" Tears came to Katherine's eyes. She didn't know what to say to her son, who was too young to hear a truly honest and truthful answer. So instead of any words, she pressed her son's face against her stomach while she herself continued to watch the scuffle through her tears. She was afraid to take an extra step in any direction. It was as if the fear had taken on substance, made itself physically tangible, and put chains around her legs so that she could not go anywhere. George jerked forward and finally broke free of his elderly mother's grip. Her arms were strong enough for her 55 years. His sister, on the other hand, was holding the man's arm much less tightly, and it was clear that she was not particularly eager to get involved in this scuffle. Katherine headed for the exit, standing by the front door were the sneakers he had come in. Nearby were the shoes of the rest of the family, as well as the shared rubber overshoes that George and Katherine used to wear to go out in the yard in muddy weather. Quickly putting on the overshoes, he opened the door and a cold fall wind blew in his face. "Where are you going?" his mother persisted. "It's the second hour of the night. Settle down, George." What she got in response were curses and some inarticulate phrases. Edwards headed toward the garage, and Mary and Olivia ran out after him. George's sister was the last one out. Before she closed the door, she turned around and looked at Katherine regretfully. Katherine didn't know then that she was seeing Olivia for the last time. Katherine Edwards, a 53-year-old woman, sat in a chair in the living room. There was a cooking program on TV, but no one was watching it. George was sitting in the kitchen eating borscht with sour cream loudly. When he finished, he silently got up from the table, put his plate in the sink, and left the room. He made his way to the living room. "Remember the day after tomorrow?" he asked glumly. Katherine didn't at first orient herself to where she was or what was going on. Even a cooking show with a young chef and interesting new recipes couldn't hold her attention for long. Eventually, she became immersed in thoughts of her worldly problems. "The day after tomorrow, remember what happens," George interjected more gruffly already. "Or have you left all your brains in that damn box already?" It took the woman a few seconds to remember what today was and what the day after tomorrow would be, respectively. It hit her when she realized that 2 days later would be September 26th. At first, some fleeting joy flashed in her eyes, and then she suddenly grew sad. "I remember," she replied sadly. 35 years since we were married." A wonderful, George muttered dryly. "At least there's still something in my head. So in that case, get ready. We'll celebrate at the restaurant." The woman looked at her husband questioningly. "At a restaurant?" she asked, raising one eyebrow. Then she removed her glasses from her eyes, and they hung on a neat string around her neck. "Do we have the money to celebrate our wedding anniversary at a restaurant?" George nodded silently and did so very confidently. "Yes," the man finally muttered. "I'll call Sam. Let him take his wife. Let him take the kids. Let's have a nice party." Katherine was alarmed by her spouse's words. She well remembered what ended the same good holiday 25 years ago. The fact that they sat for a long time without means of subsistence. She was generally very afraid to remember that time, and although all the details of that period of her life had already been erased from her memory, the sensation she had experienced at that time still haunted her sometimes, and she could feel them again when she remembered. Immediately, her blood pressure spiked and her head began to ache. "Why all of a sudden?" she asked. 35 years. "It's a big date," her husband replied. "We should celebrate it sometime. Get ready in short. Find some nice dress so you don't embarrass yourself. It's a restaurant after all." After these words, George left the living room. A few minutes later, the front door slammed. Katherine didn't know where he had gone, and she would prefer not to know further. She did not care where he went or what he was going to do. Her thoughts were occupied with another question. Where did he find the money to celebrate his 35th wedding anniversary? He couldn't make the same mistake he'd made 25 years ago. They had their own bank account, which had accumulated a good amount of money. But isn't George going to spend some of that money organizing the party? And why would he even bother? For many years now, there had been a very strained relationship between them, more like that of slave, master, or superior and subordinate. Fetching and fetching. That's exactly how Katherine Edwards felt. In the past few years, he had only called her by her first name a couple of times, and then suddenly he decided to organize an anniversary celebration. The woman had a very bad feeling. It was as if she had experienced all this before, but a long time ago. Almost 25 years ago, a few days after the 10th anniversary of their marriage. What then? What now? She felt a sense of growing anxiety, as if some great danger was approaching. "Let's go to bed, son," Katherine spoke softly, sniffing her nose and wiping away the tears on her cheeks. "Aunt Olivia and Grandma will sort it out. They'll bring Daddy home and everything will be okay. Son, everything's going to be okay. I promise." "Mom, my leg hurts," Sam said, and wrinkled his nose again. His left ankle hurt a lot, and the boy wasn't lying. It was hard for him to sleep, the constant pain, which grew stronger and weaker. And when he heard his father screaming in the darkness of the hallway, and everyone around him immediately jumped up to run to his aid. He had barely gotten up from the bed he was lying on with his mother. She lay closer to the edge, and he against the wall. "I understand, Sam," Mom muttered, "but we have to go to bed. I'll get a doctor's appointment tomorrow, and we'll go see him for sure." "No, Mom, you don't understand," the boy said louder already. "My foot hurts very badly where the blister is. Zelenka doesn't help." Sighing and wiping the tears from her cheeks one last time, Katherine bent over and said, "Let me see what's wrong with your foot." What was her surprise when she saw that her son's leg was badly swollen. Sam was barely fully leaning on his left foot, or rather he was standing on his toes, holding his heel in the air. It was painful for him to fully stand on his foot. "Sam, does it hurt straight up bad?" Edwards asked, surprised and even kind of scared. She wanted to feel her son's swollen leg, but didn't dare. He was in a lot of pain as it was, and there was no telling what would happen if she touched it. "Very much so," Sam said. "Here, I see that your leg is even swollen," Katherine said, and goosebumps ran down her back. The emergency room at the local clinic, like any other, was open 24 hours a day. And the woman's mind already began to skip thoughts of immediately calling an ambulance and taking her son there. Let those emergency room doctors call for trauma surgeons and surgeons, pull her out of their warm beds, and those save her son's leg. "Don't you have a fever?" she asked, and immediately touched the child's forehead with the palm of her hand. "Son, you are hot, so get ready immediately. We are going to the hospital. I don't like this at all." Thinking about her son's problem, it was as if she had even forgotten what had been going on in the living room until a few minutes ago. And only the acrid smell of spilled cologne mixed with the odor of alcohol and other substances reminded her of it. Taking Sam under her arm, she helped him to the room where he got dressed. She had to help her put on his sweatpants. He had to endure unbearable pain, his face squirming into an unspeakably horrible grimace. Looking at the expression on her son's face, Katherine realized that there was no way to delay. His temperature was definitely over 38 degrees. The swelling on his leg was quite large, and Katherine prayed that no infection or other contagion had gotten into his bloodstream. It wasn't enough that her 8-year-old son had to have his leg amputated because of some pathetic callus. The callus had formed a few days after the boy had bought new athletic sneakers, and he often ran to the playground in them to play soccer with his classmates. Soon after the purchase, he began to complain that the back of the left sneaker was pressing on his ankle. So Katherine bought him a Band-Aid, but it didn't help. The pain grew worse with every step he took, and the callus seemed to grow. After collecting her son, Katherine quickly dressed herself. In the hallway, where she had stood 10 minutes ago, listening to the screams of her mother-in-law and the shouts of her drunken husband, hung the phone. Leaving her son in his room, she ran over to it and dialed the ambulance. "My son has a swollen leg, high fever. We can't get to the hospital ourselves," she said hurriedly and excitedly into the receiver. "What's the temperature?" asked the dispatcher with an unpleasant voice. "I don't know. I didn't bother to measure it and called you right away, but it feels pretty high. I touched his forehead. It's very hot. My son needs a surgeon or trauma surgeon who can examine his leg." "We'll determine who your son needs," the dispatcher replied indifferently. "What's the cause of the swollen leg?" Katherine told the dispatcher that the cause was a blister and was told, "Wait. Consider the ambulance on its way." Katherine helped Sam out of bed, to the front door and to his shoes. She would have put him in galoshes, of course, but George had gone somewhere in them. So she had to suffer a little herself, watching her son slip his sore, swollen foot into the shoe. As he did so, he grunted and wrinkled his nose, and the woman realized that he was in a lot of pain. She was even a little ashamed that she couldn't do anything about it. "Be patient, son," she soothed him. "Be patient just a little longer. The ambulance is on its way." They stepped out into the yard and headed toward the wicket gate. Katherine glanced toward the garage and saw that there was a light burning in a small window. There were silhouettes waving their arms every now and then, and she realized that things would settle down soon. Olivia and her mother-in-law would put George to bed on the rotten old couch in the garage, and they'd go back inside and maybe clean up what had once stood on the dresser. But she continued to be oppressed by some strange sense of uneasiness, a sense of impending disaster. An old white loaf with rusty sides and a red cross on the side drove quickly up to the Edwards house. Putting Sam in the car, Katherine turned around and looked at the house. Everything was normal, but there was still a feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't even a feeling, but a premonition. She sighed heavily, mentally praying for her husband. And then she got into the car. All this happened in a matter of seconds, and very soon this very old white bukhanka with rusty sides and a red cross on the side wall was speeding toward the emergency room of the Anbertjean. The doctor on duty examined the swollen leg. Sam slipped a thermometer under his armpit. Pulling it out 10 minutes later, he looked indifferently at the reading of 38.6. "Actually, the temperature in your case doesn't make any difference," he mumbled. You say your foot is swollen after the appearance of the blister. Yes, Katherine confirmed, and Sam nodded his head silently. You've got pus inside there. We'll have to cut it out. There's nothing we can do. Goosebumps ran down Sam's back, and his heart thumped harder in his chest, so hard that even Katherine, and probably the doctor on duty, felt it, the vibrations and the vibrations of the floor. In that case, I'm getting a surgeon down here now, and he'll do it all. I don't think it will take long, but the doctor will probably have to wait. You have time to wait, don't you? The question seemed rather silly to Katherine. She was willing to put any of her business on hold to send her son anywhere, as long as he was okay. And yes, there would definitely be time to fix the problem troubling her. Great, the doctor said. I'll call the surgeon Leonid Vasilievich now. I hope he hasn't fallen asleep on the job yet, and it will be possible to get through to him without too many adventures. The doctor on duty dialed some number on the phone and put the receiver to his ear. Waited a few seconds. Leonid Vasilievich, you're awake? He said. And there was silence for 2 or 3 seconds. Very well. Then please come down to the emergency room. A kid came in with a swollen leg. Temperature's 38.6. Pause again for a few seconds. Yeah, I already told you it's a no-go. All right, I'll wait. He hung up, crossed his arms, and looked at Edwards. Waiting, he said. Smiled kindly somehow and looked specifically at Sam. Don't be afraid, kid. For one thing, this is a fairly common procedure, and Leonard knows exactly how to perform it. Second, it's not that long. Yes, it's uncomfortable and a little painful, but aren't you a man? A man, Sam said firmly, as if confirming the doctor's question. There, exclaimed the man. That's a wonderful attitude. I like it. Keep it up, boy. If you take a little pain now during the operation, you'll be able to play soccer or run again later. I don't know what you prefer anymore. Soccer, Katherine assured him. He prefers soccer. I've had this pain for a long time, Sam pronounced. My leg can hurt a lot. My mom put green on my blister first, but the green didn't help. It's a good thing it was green, said the doctor. Your mom is good. It never hurts to disinfect a wound. In that moment, Leonard, the surgeon on duty, entered the emergency room. He said hello to the emergency room doctor on duty by the hand, and then waved to Sam. Hi, he said rather cheerfully. Tell me what you've got going on. I was told you were going to cut my leg. Is that true? Katherine felt a little embarrassed at this question her son had asked the surgeon, but she remained silent. She was well aware of her son's anxiety and excitement, and the feeling of awkwardness passed very quickly. He was entitled to ask any question he wanted of the surgeon because it was primarily about his health. Leonard grinned. Really? He said, smiling. I've already been told what kind of problem you've come in with, and there's just no other options here, you know. The most important thing is not to be afraid. I'm going to give you a shot of anesthesia in your leg. Then I'm going to apply pressure to get the pus out and rewrap your foot. He spoke so easily and casually about all this. Katherine developed a sense of trust in this man. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he doesn't call himself a surgeon for nothing at all. Let me see the leg. I need to make sure the doctor on duty didn't misdiagnose it. The sneakers lay on the floor, while Sam himself sat on the couch with his legs overhanging. Leonard gently leaned over the foot, pulled down the black sock, and examined the foot. Yes, Robert, you said it right. We'll have to cut it. The leg is swollen because pus has accumulated inside. And from the size of it, it's a cavity. I can judge that there's more than enough pus inside. Say, boy, how long have you had this blister? Sam thought for a few seconds, and then answered, I don't remember, but more than a week for sure. Over a week, Leonard muttered to himself. Okay, good. Say, can you walk with me to the dressing room? We do all the minor surgeries there. Is it very hard for you to walk, or can you still do it? I can, Sam said. His mom suddenly thought her son said that out of confusion, but then she noticed the determination with which the boy got up from the couch and with the doctor's help walked with him, and she lost all doubt. She, too, got up from the couch, picked up a lone, fallen sneaker from the floor, and staggered after them. George, with a disgruntled expression on his face, went into the garage and turned on the garage light. It was cold enough in here. and the man shivered. Coming out of the house, he realized that going to look for a job now was obviously not the best idea, and he wanted to get away from the annoying relatives. He felt very dizzy, so he decided to hide from his mother and sister. He could sleep in the garage. He had an old sofa there. Mary and Olivia came in right after him, and they shouted something loudly at him, but he paid them no attention at all. His target was the old, aged couch with a spring sticking out. But his legs were shaking, his head was spinning, and all he wanted to do now was lie down in the hope that he would feel at least a little better. A lump was rising in his throat, and George was vaguely aware that if he didn't lie down now, the entire contents of his stomach would soon be on the floor. "What kind of example are you setting for your son?" His mother shouted at him. "What will Sam take from such a fatherly upbringing? That being an alcoholic is a good thing. So what's going to happen to him when he grows up? One of his friends will say his father is an entrepreneur. Another will say his dad's a civil servant. What's Sam going to say? Have you thought about that? He'll say his father was an alcoholic, and in the worst case scenario, he'll say it with pride." Mary sputtered with anger. Looking at it, Olivia realized that it was her mother, not her brother, who needed comforting. After all, she was not setting a good example for her grandson either, when she threw her fists at her son in front of him. She walked beside Mary, who was talking very loudly and waving her arms vigorously, and controlled her so that she wouldn't lash out at George again. Edward sat down on the couch, rested his elbows on his wide-open legs, and covered his face with his palms, his eyes closing in on themselves. But the only thing keeping him awake right here, and now in a casual pose, was the ringing voice lecturing him. "Mom, back off," he bellowed, and for a second Mary was silent. Olivia was already glad that this was the end of it, but she was immediately disappointed. The woman began to speak even louder and harsher than she had before. George's sister was the last to enter the garage, pulling the heavy metal door shut behind her. It was a little skewed, and sometimes hit the ground as Olivia closed it. Somehow a small, smooth pebble had magically formed underneath it, and that's what it caught on. And there was a very loud and unpleasant, sharp sound, causing Olivia to raise her head reflexively. Mary, on the other hand, didn't seem to hear the squeak, because she was cursing loudly at her son. The garage door was completely closed now. There was a door, but it was old and rusty, and it wouldn't open. So if George went into an empty garage that hadn't had a car in a long time, he went in through the gate. It took about 15 minutes before Mary calmed down, at least a little. By this time, Edwards was lying on the couch, occasionally replying something to his impulsive mother, even though he was drunk, but he was nauseous and dreadfully sleepy. Somehow he was finding the strength not to pass out. It was as if he had a heightened sense of conscience that kept him awake while his parents' woman talked to him and forced him to answer something. So when the woman calmed down and stopped yelling at her drunken son, he gradually began to lose touch with reality and fell into a dream. A couple minutes after that, he was snoring away, curled up on the old couch. "Mom, what was that?" Olivia finally asked. "Why are you so mad at him? Even I can understand him. He got fired from his job, and now his family is on the brink of total devastation. And that's despite the fact that they spent a lot of money celebrating their wedding anniversary a week ago." Mary waved her hand. "I don't know," she muttered. "I get it, of course, but showing up home at 2:30 in the morning is normal. It's not normal. Even if you've been fired from your job, find the strength to keep your head up. Or shall I tell you how he should have behaved?" "Mom, let's not do that." Olivia waved it off. "I've heard that story 1,000 times, about how our father went to plow or shift at the mine the day his parents died, and then found the courage to go to the gym." "That's courage," Mary exclaimed. "Can you imagine what goes through a man's mind when he learns in the morning that his parents are dead, suffocated in their apartment by a gas leak? There's no words to describe it. And my Pete, God rest his soul, went to work that day, as if nothing had happened. Then he went to the athletic field as usual. It wasn't until he got home in the evening that he took the time to grieve about it. So only then did he let his feelings out. If tears can be called weakness at all," Olivia said guiltily. "But you have to realize that George isn't our dad. George is a different person." "I'm sorry, Mom, but it's one thing to have your relatives die. God forgive you. But your main family is fine. And it's another thing when you get fired from your job and the well-being of your main family is still very much in question. Mary remained silent. Perhaps she realized that she had really exaggerated a lot, but she was careful not to let it show. She shook her head a little. She glanced toward the couch. George was curled up on the couch, wheezing. "He seems to be sleeping soundly," she said, nodding toward him. "We can go home now." "Let him sleep here. It's cold," said her daughter. "What do you suggest? Wake him up again and drag him into the house so Sam can look at that drunken body?" "No, that's not going to happen. He and Katherine are probably already in bed. There's no need to get them up again. Sam's leg is bad enough as it is. And then there's George's mess. Let's go home." Mary and Olivia didn't hear the gate in the yard creak and bang because of the loud shouting, nor did they hear the ambulance come to the same gate and take Katherine and her son to the hospital. They thought those were still at home. That's why, when something wrong happened in the garage with vodka and the wires caught fire, they tried to call for help for a long time, unable to open the jammed gate, and only then did they move to take action on their own. By the time the fire had reached more than half of the garage, Mary and Olivia realized that neither of them was getting out of here. Edwards Jr. broke the window through which Katherine had seen them some time ago, and she and her mother threw George, who had inhaled carbon monoxide, out of the garage. They couldn't get out themselves and stayed in that garage forever. That was October 1st, 1999. It was September 26th. Waking up that day, Katherine Edwards immediately began preparations for the celebration. Already a reservation had been made at the restaurant, and her son and his family had been invited. The woman from the morning began to imagine how well today's day would go. At first, she didn't even remember the feeling of impending danger that had haunted her the previous few days. But then it reappeared at the most unexpected moment. George Edwards had awakened early that day. There was no nauseating odor of booze emanating from him, and his wife was glad that the man hadn't been drinking yesterday. Although he didn't drink every day as much as he once did, he still drank quite often. Waking up earlier than usual, George had a dense breakfast of scrambled eggs with sausage and tomato, washed it all down with a glass of skim milk, which was drunk mainly by Katherine Edwards, and then went to watch TV. The table at the restaurant was scheduled for 4 p.m. Sam, their son, who was 33, was able to get off work 2 hours early. His spouse named Elvira was not working, but was raising their son Ian, so she did not need to leave. Katherine Edwards again experienced this strange feeling only closer to lunchtime, again thinking about something of her own. She was once again recalling the events of 1999, how in an instant her husband had lost both his mother and sister. And what depressed him even more, it had happened in his own garage due to faulty wiring. They had saved him, and they themselves had stayed there forever. Remembering this, Katherine Edwards could not help but remember how the week before they had all sat together in a restaurant, drinking expensive alcohol and eating expensive meals. And at the other end of the room, musicians were playing beautiful jazz music. The contrast between the good events of that time and the bad, and the minimal time that had passed, made the woman think that something was bound to go wrong this time too. And this is now. Tonight they would gather again in an expensive restaurant, rejoice and rejoice. And then a week later, and perhaps even directly on the date of Olivia's death, something terrible would happen. The feeling was very intrusive. It was impossible to get rid of it. You had to concentrate on something else. And usually the TV would help with that. Now the TV was busy, and George was watching it, and she had never been able to concentrate and get into the plot of some police, detective, action movies, and other men's programs. After a couple minutes of watching such shows, she would get bored and start thinking about problems again. It was proven. And then she decided to distract herself in another way. She started picking out the clothes she wanted to wear to the celebration. Katherine Edwards had several beautiful ceremonial dresses in her closet, and she even took a few minutes to choose which first one she would try on. It had been a long time since she had worn them because she hardly ever went out anywhere. As she put on the first dress and looked at herself in the mirror, Edwards realized that now at her age, it was more like a one-night show than a dress. She had long since stopped being a slender woman, and the age-related weight gain and sagging skin was making itself very well known. She would look too ugly in this dress, she thought, and started to look for another one. But here was the problem. All 4 of her dresses, which she had last worn many years ago, had the same problem. None of them fit her the way they once had. She looked strange in all of them. Putting on one of those dresses and looking in the mirror, she even felt ashamed of herself. Realizing that none of the dresses suited her, Edwards began to choose from other options. Her eye immediately fell on a long black skirt and a blue blouse with short sleeves. Katherine Edwards decided that this look should be more acceptable. After putting it on and looking at herself in the mirror, she summed it up. Like this, in a blouse and a long skirt, she looks more or less decent. Not expensive and rich, but not embarrassing and not too cheap either, just right. Coming out of the bedroom where she was measuring clothes, she said, "Will you please look at me in this outfit?" The frowning husband pulled away from the TV and looked at her, after which he frowned even more. He tilted his head slightly forward, as if to study his wife's appearance more closely. "You nuts?" he asked. "What is this, Katherine? Don't you have any other outfit? I mean, you've had a lot of dresses that you've—" "They all look kind of wildly pathetic," Katherine Edwards replied. "I've just been looking in the mirror, and mean to say that none of those dresses look on me like this one. It's still more or less decent." George Edwards sighed and rubbed his forehead with the pads of his fingers. "There's nothing else at all." "No, well, stay home then," George Edwards said. And then, as if nothing had happened, he continued watching his cop shows on television. On the screen was a chase scene in which criminals were chasing all over the city and clipping almost every car while shooting back at the police. This typical scene was much more interesting to him than his wife's appearance. "What do you mean?" Katherine Edwards asked in surprise. Directly, he shrugged his shoulders. "You look too awful in that. You'd better stay home with the children. I'll meet you myself." His words startled the woman. She was silent for a few seconds at first, digesting what she had heard, and then she shook her head. She was more struck by the calmness with which George said it than by the substance of his message. "Then, let me put on the dress." "All right," she said. "It won't hurt if I wear the orange one." He grinned indifferently. "You're too old to be wearing that." "No, really, Katherine, stay home." "What's your restaurant?" He grinned again. "You found someone to invite. You can't even pick out your own clothes. It's not a cheap restaurant, you know." She stopped talking again. She still hadn't found out where George had gotten the money for their wedding anniversary. And at that moment, she thought for a second that he was deceiving her. Perhaps he had withdrawn some money from their account, spent it for his own pleasure, and now he was trying to cover himself by making her look wrong. But the thought flashed through her mind as fleetingly as a race car on a Formula 1 track. In a second, she'd forgotten it. She walked back into the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She would definitely go to the celebration of their wedding, no matter what it cost her. And she didn't care what she looked like, or who might not like her appearance. Katherine Edwards was more puzzled than upset. She realized that there was no point in getting upset, and perhaps George was joking. But even if his words were not a joke, she was not going to listen to him. After all, it was their holiday together, and they should go to it together. When he'd married her, he hadn't thought about what she'd look like 35 years later, and if he did, it was fine with him. So now he can't complain that she doesn't look right or that he's not satisfied with her appearance. At 4:30 in the afternoon, George hailed a cab, and while it was on its way, he had time to put on his only brown three-piece suit and apply the remnants of his men's perfume. When his wife came out in the same attire, seeing which he had told her to stay at home, he said indignantly, "I told you you're not going anywhere." "I'm going," Katherine stubbornly replied. "This is our holiday, not yours, and I have to be there too." "Don't worry. I'll be there for both of us," snapped her husband. "You're not going anywhere in this one." She ignored his words again, and when they reached the shoe locker in the hallway and she bent down to retrieve her shoes, George quickly snatched her keys from the coat rack, ran out the door, and locked her outside. Just as the cab pulled up, he took a quick step toward the wicket. "You bitch," Katherine cried out in a voice full of despair. "You're a creature, George. You're just a creature." She began pounding on the front door from the inside. She cried and covered her face with her hands. And she was lucky she hadn't decided to put on makeup before going out, and no mascara had run down her cheeks. Sam was already seated at the restaurant, at the right table with his wife Ashley and son Ben. So when his father walked in, Sam immediately stood up and waved for George to see him. "Great," smiling, the father said and shook his son's hand firmly. "Hi, Ashley." "Hi, Ben." "So where's Mom?" Sam asked. "Yeah, where's Katherine?" Ashley asked a little more anxiously, with their 4-year-old son sitting on her lap. Scratching the back of his head, George replied, "She's not feeling well. Her blood pressure spiked, and she decided to stay home. You know, old age is no fun. And I think she might be coming up here a little later," he said with a fake smile, trying to confirm his words that everything was all right. Sam glanced over at his wife and shrugged, but he didn't immediately like that strange smile of his father's. And he knew him well, and he knew from his mother how he'd been acting lately. And he realized that even on such a significant holiday, he could not smile so happily. Something was wrong. They sat down at the table, and Sam called for the waiter. While a young guy in a shirt and black bow tie walked to the table, George was entertaining himself with his little grandson, who was sitting on Ashley's lap. "Who's that pretty little thing we have here?" Growing up, George mouthed, pulling on a smile as he imitated a cockroach's moving whiskers with his fingers. "Who's that? And we have such a sturdy man growing up here, don't we?" "But yeah," Ben exclaimed, not very coherently. Sam had been watching his father's behavior warily all this time. He was making all sorts of logical chains in his head, and each one of them finally convinced him that something was going on here. And if George really cared that much about this party, then the absence of Sam's mother would be cause for sadness. But Edward Soar was, on the contrary, happy and cheerful, making some jokes and trying to ease the tension created by the mere sight of his son. "Why are you so glum?" he asked. "Smile. Didn't get enough sleep, sons." "Aha," the man replied dryly. "Definitely didn't sleep well." He glanced at his wife Ashley at times, and she glanced at him. It was clear from the look in her eyes that she sensed a catch in this too, but she didn't let it show. Her eyes spoke for themselves. Concerned, worried pupils looked at Sam and then switched to her son, all her tension hidden behind a sweet smile. "Dad," Sam said suddenly in disbelief, looking at George. "Are you sure Mom's okay?" "Must be fine," his father assured him. "Just pressure, nothing more. I think Mom's sleeping right now and then she'll call us and hook up. Give her some time to rest." Even his answer sounded too strange and naive. By this time the waiter had already brought them the dishes they had ordered, as well as the bottle of not the cheapest strong wine George had asked for, and he was finishing his second glass. By now he was even more cheerful than he had been half an hour ago. "Why the rest, sorry?" Sam asked. "How's that?" George hesitated. "She got sick, didn't she? Here she said she wanted to get some sleep." He took a big sip of wine, emptying his glass, then reached for the bottle to pour the wine a third time. Among everyone present, he was the only one drinking. After saying that, Sam couldn't take it anymore and pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. "I should call her, I guess," he mumbled thoughtfully, looking for his mother's number in his contact list. "Why?" His father immediately perked up. Don't disturb your mother's rest. She has high blood pressure. She's probably asleep right now. Why bother her when she's not feeling well?" He took another big sip, then reached across the table to take the phone from his son. But Sam oriented himself in time and pulled his hand away. Looking at George, he felt the anger in him begin to boil up at this point. He made such a sullen and intimidating expression on his face that even Ashley shuddered. The girl herself was very kind and had no tolerance for anger. She was always very afraid of upsetting her husband somehow or saying something hurtful to him. And when someone else did, and Sam really started to get angry, she would get sick to her stomach. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked forehead to forehead. "Why are you trying to snatch the phone from me?" "So you won't bother your mother," George tried to answer as confidently as possible. But his son could hear his vocal cords quivering. George was nervous, and Sam was quick to recognize that. "I won't bother her. I'll just call to see how she's doing with her health and asks if she's welcome at our banquet or not." He dialed her number, though, and the phone receiver buzzed. He put the phone to his ear and began to wait. At the same time, watching the expression on George's face change, he was clearly afraid of something, but tried to show unwavering confidence. Katherine didn't pick up the phone. The robotic voice in the receiver announced that the caller was not answering and asked her to call back later. Sam put the phone away. His anxiety level rose significantly. "I'll go and find out in person," he said suddenly. "Suddenly there's something really wrong with Mom." He stood up abruptly from the table. Ashley and his son looked at him worriedly. George finished the rest of the wine in his glass. Then, just as abruptly as his son, he stood up and followed him. Sam left the restaurant and ran toward his car. A few seconds later, George came out of the same door and shouted, "Wait, don't go anywhere without me." "Why is that?" asked his son irritably, already preparing to climb into the car. "Dad, what are you hiding from me? What's wrong with Mom?" "I have the house keys," he said, opening the door and getting into the front passenger seat. "Let's go." On the way, Sam tried a few more times to find out from his father what was going on, but he answered only with some cryptic, vague phrases like, "We'll find out together now," or "I'll tell you when we get there." Edwards Jr. was becoming even more convinced that his father was being dishonest with him. And how could a man be honest who, as Sam had long ago learned, morally abused his own wife, who didn't drink and wasn't registered as employed anywhere, who got by on one-time part-time jobs? Is it possible to trust a man who comes joyful, happy to celebrate the 35th anniversary of marriage without his wife, and says that she is not well, and she stayed home, and he continues to laugh and have fun, at the same time pouring himself a glass of strong wine? "Ashley, are you still at the restaurant? Come back home." "Yes, to our house. I'll tell you all about it when I get there." "Okay. Now I'm dropping you some money. Pay the bill. I'll see you later." Sam hung up the phone. He stood in front of the front door, smoking a cigarette. His hands were shaking and his eyes were red from crying. Sometimes he stood on tiptoe and peered outside over the fence, looking for his father to come home. George had left the house half an hour ago, with little or no explanation of how they'd arrived. Sam quickly jumped out of the car and ran into the yard, pushing forward the creaky metal gate. He literally ran all the way to the front door and had no intention of slowing down until he remembered that the front door was locked and his father had the keys. "But here you go," panted George, who tried to keep up with his son, but due to age and health issues couldn't run as fast, then handed his son the keys. As Sam quickly inserted one of the two identical keys into the keyhole, turned it twice to the right, and unlocked the front door. Then, as he entered the hallway, he immediately heard some rummaging in the living room. Then came Norman's sobs. He ran in there. What Sam saw would forever be etched in his memory. On September 26, 2024, he almost lost his mother. She was standing on a stool, fitting some kind of harness found in the hall closet through a hook on the chandelier. "Mommy!" He shrieked loudly and immediately tore toward Katherine. She was crying as he ran up to her. She held out her arms to him, climbed down from the stool, and then hugged him tightly and buried her face in his shoulder. "Mom, what are you doing?" asked Sam, tears rapidly forming in his eyes. "Mom, what are you doing?" He was shocked, so he repeated the same phrase many times. Life had not prepared him for this. He couldn't even think about the fact that someday he would have to save his own mom from herself. She wanted to get her hands on herself. How am I supposed to live with a man who hates me? Crying loudly, she asked, "I can't take it anymore, son. I just can't take it anymore." George entered the room. When he saw that there was a tourniquet hanging from the hook of the chandelier and a stool under the chandelier itself, he lowered his eyes, immediately turned around and left. And he never appeared in that house again. Katherine Edwards told her son everything, about the bad feeling, about the humiliation she had suffered, and about which she did not dare to talk before, as well as about what exactly happened today. "It's not clear where he got the money from," Katherine said a little later, when she had calmed down a little. "So we'll have to go to the bank and see if he took any money out of the account." "But wouldn't he want to take you with him?" Sam asked with a frown. "He wanted to get drunk. I think so, but not in the usual way, but in a special way or something," Katherine Edwards said quietly, "and I would have prevented him from doing so. That's the way it seems to me. And the main thing is to make it look like it was my fault as usual, Sam, as usual." He'd gotten her to the point where she was ready to seriously do something terrible to herself. It's unknown how he felt at that moment when he saw his son helping his mother off the stool she was about to end her life on. Sam stood on the front porch of the house for another long time, looking out over the fence into the street, searching for him. He thought his father would come back, but his father never did. And where had he disappeared to? Also unknown. He never showed up at the house again, and none of the family would report him to the police. If he's still alive, they decided let him go. And if he's not, then he's not as good as dead. On her way home, Ellen overhears her mother talking to her fiancé, is stunned. Her mother was talking. "Why do you keep listening to your mother?" Grace questioned. "Ellen, you're 36 years old, you're an independent woman. Your mom is your dependent. And you're still indulging her whims. The years are ticking away. Soon you'll be out of the running for a baby. You're almost 40. Ellen smiled sadly. She realized that Grace was right. That if she didn't have a baby now, she could say goodbye to that dream. She had never talked to her mother about having a baby, but in her heart she thought of a baby, her baby, so dear, smelling of milk and happiness. Try to find someone to have a baby with. Grace admonished her friend. There are only alcoholics, drug addicts, and men of non-traditional orientation around. You won't give birth to a child from the first man you meet, or you'll have a sick child or a child with a bad heredity, and you'll have to raise it yourself. So it should be taken seriously. And do you think that on me lame someone stole? Ellen doubted. Maybe just who? Drunk, and even then only for once. Drunk in conception, I'm afraid. What if there's something wrong with the baby? Then his life, as well as mine, will now go down the drain. That's not true. Grace objected. Ellen, you're beautiful. Yes, pretty, but beautiful. It's just that your mommy makes you self-conscious about yourself. You know how our political economy teacher was hitting on you in high school, and you turned him down. Grace, come on. I was only 18 and he was 36. He seemed like an old man to me. And now you're 36 and you're going to say you're old? Sometimes I'm ashamed of myself when I see how big kids my peers have. I don't have any. You're wrong. Then why'd you blow off Dan from our class? He was only 2 years older than you. Yeah, Dan and I were in love. But it wasn't until he introduced me to his mom that I found out the first night that she already hated me. I went to offer my help in the kitchen, Ellen continued. And then I was stopped by Dan's mom's words. I overheard them talking. Are you out of your mind? Dan's mom said. Where did you get that ugly girl? What can she do? What can she do? And Dan told her. I don't want anyone else. I love Helene, and I'll marry her. When I heard that, I ran out of the apartment without warning. Do you know, Grace, how much it hurt? Then Ellen sighed. I don't care anymore. I've accepted that married life isn't for me. If normal women can't make a life for themselves, what about me? You didn't tell me about this, Grace said, confused. What's to say, Grace? I know I'm ugly. So what? Dan turned you down right away? No, on the contrary, he urged me to marry him. But I hesitated. And my mom supported me in my doubts. She said to me, you're lame, Helene. It's not for me to remind you of that. Accept it. It's a great handicap. And no one needs you but me. Vaughn, even your father, as soon as he had a normal son by his mistress, he abandoned you and me. You want to be abandoned all the time? Then marry your Dan. And you don't want to be abandoned? Live with me, I'll never leave you, I won't betray you. You're a fool, Ellen. Grace concluded. Your mom was just afraid to be alone. If Dan had left you, you'd have a child. And maybe even more than one. Maybe he wouldn't have left you. What's that supposed to mean? I know I'm an idiot, Ellen nodded. They say you should listen to your parents. They don't give you bad advice. And then I regretted 100 times that I listened to my mom. I don't know how she will react to the fact that I still want a child and will strive to get pregnant and give birth to a baby. Only if she's against it this time. I won't listen to her, Ellen said firmly. Are you out of your mind? Ellen's mother, Lexi, was outraged. Having a baby at 36, you're without a husband. Only a crazy person would do that. And I am crazy, Ellen retorted. You've been telling me that my whole life. I'm not ugly, that's why I didn't get married. But I can have a child, which is what I'm going to do. You can't afford it, Lexi said. And then, even if you do, how are you going to work and raise a child? Are you relying on me? I'll tell you right now, you can't count on me. I've had enough of you. Calm down, Mom. I'm not counting on anyone, Ellen replied. Are you pregnant already? Lexi asked, looking at her daughter point blank. Not yet, but I'll do my best in that direction. And your moaning is not going to stop me, Ellen said firmly. I've raised a good daughter who doesn't consider me, Lexi said hysterically. Are you going to go to the bar to have a baby who needs a limp? Ellen realized that her mother was on a rampage. And if she, Ellen, didn't leave the house for a while, her mother would drive herself to the emergency room with her tantrums. And Ellen didn't want that. She knew that then she would listen to her mother for 6 months, what a bad daughter she was, and that she almost brought her to a heart attack. As soon as the front door slammed, Lexi immediately came to her senses. Ellen was gone. There's no one to throw tantrums now. She had to think things through and stop her daughter's plans. After all, if the baby was born, Ellen would be on maternity leave, and almost all of her money would go toward it. Lexi knew it would take a lot of money to raise a child, and she wasn't used to denying herself anything. She was only 59 years old, and she wasn't about to turn into an old woman. Lexi's pension was small, but Ellen's paycheck was big. And Lexi's mother was happy to spend her daughter Ellen's money on herself, especially since her daughter didn't need much. Ellen knew that with her lame leg, no amount of dressing up would help her. Lexi, on the other hand, updated her closet every year and went to resorts twice a year. But if the baby came, Lexi would lose all of that. So she felt she had to stop her daughter and not support her delusion with a baby. A baby will destroy my whole personal life, Lexi thought. And I've already been deprived of it. I'm not going to let this baby come into the world. Ruin my life. Going to Grace, Ellen's friend, was not something Lexi wanted to do. She tried to see Grace on neutral territory to avoid interfering with Grace's family life. Now it was evening, and Grace was with her family. Plus, Ellen wasn't going to be home tonight. She knew that if she came home, her mother would throw an all-night tantrum. Ellen decided to call her paternal brother Alex, who she had been friends with since childhood, something her mother hated. Lexi hated Alex with a fierce hatred, believing that he was the reason her father had left the family. At first, Ellen thought so too, but as she grew up, she began to realize that her father couldn't stand her mother's selfish nature, around which the whole world should revolve. Hi, Alex. Are you alone tonight, or are you waiting for someone? Ellen asked. Alex was 7 years younger than Ellen. He had his own choker, which he was paying off on the mortgage, but he wasn't married and was quite independent. Hi, sis. Who should I wait for but you? Alex answered. Don't pretend. The girls must not leave the apartment. I've taken them all out so far, he laughed. Come in. Old lady will have a chat and tea. Or maybe something stronger. I'd like to spend the night. Will you take your sister in? Ellen asked. Where am I going to go? You can't choose your relatives, joked Alex. Buy some bread on the way. Good, I bought it. I'm waiting for you, Christian answered with a smile. Are you and Lexi on the outs, as usual? Exactly, Ellen sighed. But as you said yourself, you can't choose your relatives. She's a mother, after all. Except she doesn't like it when I get in the way of her plans. And I decided to do it my way and disobey her this time. How dare you? Christian said jokingly. And what is this idea that has been born in your beautiful head? Apparently it affects Lexi's personal interests, since her selfishness can't bear the change that has come over her cloudless life. You want to tell me what this horror you and your mom are fighting about? Or is it a secret? It's no secret. I want to have a baby, and my mom didn't like it. And I know why. I'm not a girl anymore. I know what's going on. That's news, sister. Christian smiled. Is the baby already conceived? No, Helen answered sadly. And this is probably the hardest part of my plan for the baby. I don't know how to attract men. I haven't been trained in this skill since I was a teenager. and from that age I was told that nobody needs me with my limp. I agree. I don't want a romantic relationship, but I just want to have a baby. Do you know how much I'd love him? With all my heart. I love him now. I don't know if I'm going to have my baby or not. Don't worry, sister, you'll have your baby, because you'll be a good mother. It's all good. The only question is, who are you going to have a baby with? Help me with that, please. You're really something, old woman. Christian laughed. How can I help you? Can I introduce you to some of my friends? Helene looked at her brother hopefully. Please. And what will you say to them? There's my sister. Help me conceive a child, Ellen begged her brother. You don't have to tell them anything. I'll try to have a relationship with one of them. If I can make it work, and the potential father of the baby won't even know he's having a child. You know me, Christian. I'm a man of my word. None of this pleased Christian, and he felt uncomfortable. But Ellen looked at him so hopeful that he couldn't refuse her. All right, he said reluctantly. I'll introduce you, and then you can deal with it yourself. You're back, Lexi said angrily to her daughter. She doesn't sleep at home. She's on the prowl for a substitute father. I never thought I'd live to see such shame. Ellen remained silent. She wasn't going to keep talking to her mother. She knew if she answered, Lexi would make a scene that would ruin her mood for the day. And she still had to work today. Tomorrow was Saturday, 2 days off. And Ellen didn't know where to escape her mother's wrath for those days. Right now she wished she'd bought a mortgage and stayed living with Lexi, who was drinking her blood one drop at a time. Ellen couldn't imagine living with her mother in the same apartment when the baby came. At least at work, she was taking a break from her. And with the baby coming, close contact was unavoidable. Ellen hadn't left work yet when Christian called her. Hi. So, old lady, get your battle colors ready and come to my place tonight. The groomsmen will be there at 8 p.m., so I'm waiting. I don't want any groomsmen, Ellen said sadly. I only want a child. Well, that's for you to figure out among yourselves who needs who and for what. My business is the side. I only play the role of matchmaker. Ellen, I hope you're not going to break me up with my friends by trying to get help. I'm a delicate man, Ellen assured him. I'm not going to be pushy. If it works, it works. And if it doesn't, well, that's just the way it is. But we have to start somewhere. All right, I'll wait for you, Christian nodded. Ellen decided not to go home. She decided to come to her brother's house a little early, sit down at the table and not get up until she left, so that the guys would not immediately see her peculiarity and would not be repulsed by her straightforwardness. Ellen knew she was an interesting conversationalist and decided to use that very trump card first. In her position, one must proceed with caution. She knew that even without makeup she was pretty and even looked younger without makeup. So she only brushed her long red hair and applied gloss to her lips, which she did in vain. After all, while she was getting there, she bit off all the gloss from excitement. Here, let's set the table real quick, Ellen set a bag of food in the kitchen. Wow, what delicious things. Christian admired, pulling out the gastronomic delights. Under these conditions, I'm ready to bring you a beau every day. Every day won't work, Helene said seriously. If it doesn't work out today, I'll close this door and think about how to realize my dream. I hope they don't know I'm limping. No, they don't. Come on, I'm kidding. You know I'm always here for you, sis. Before he could say anything, the doorbell rang. Christian ran to open it, and Ellen remained seated at the table, hiding her foot under the table. Two of Christian's friends, one of whom introduced himself as Emmett and the other as Carl, walked into the kitchen where Helene, blushing with excitement, was sitting. Ellen, smiling, introduced herself. Ellen, the sister of that wonderful talker. And immediately, to dot all the I's, she added, Why didn't you introduce us to your sister before? Emmett said, smiling broadly. You are selfish and greedy. You were afraid that they would steal Ellen from you. Everyone laughed at Emmett's jokes and supported the feast with noise and friendship. Emmett was more active towards Helen than Carl, but the pressure and youth of these boys scared her away. She looked at them and saw them as her brother Christian, and she did not see them as the father of her child. Ellen realized that she couldn't get into bed with any of them, and take advantage of their youth. Now she decided for herself that the one who would give her a child must be at least the same age as her. And these are boys compared to her, one of whom she might have seduced but would not dare. "All right, guys. It was nice to meet your friends, but I have to go," Ellen said. "Christian, can you order me a cab?" Carl started to persuade Helene to stay and stay longer. He even volunteered to walk her home afterwards. But she flatly refused, which surprised Christian when she got up from the table and walked limping toward the front door. Blood rushed to Emmett's face. He stood before her red as a cancer and blinked confusedly, then pulled himself together and said, "I'll walk you to the cab." Ellen appreciated his gallantry. She saw in Emmett's and Carl's eyes pity for her. But she didn't want pity. She wanted the child. "No," Helene answered him. "Christian will take me. Forgive me for this adventure," Helene said sadly as they rode down the elevator. "Good friends you have. I never doubted you had such friends. You're the best brother I've ever had." "My birthday is in 2 months," Christian joked as usual, seeing that Helene was upset. "It's a little early for you to be singing dithyrambs to me," Helene Christian said. He hugged Helene and added, "Everything will be all right, sister. When I say that, it comes true. Do you believe me?" "I believe you," said Helene as she got into the cab. "I believe you the most. You're my favorite person. Thank you for being here." "That's a cool sister you have," Christian Emmett said when he returned to his friends. "What happened to her leg?" The last thing Christian wanted to talk about was Helene. "An injury," he answered briefly. "She's beautiful, but her eyes are very sad," Carl remarked. "I feel sorry for her." Christian didn't answer anything, and the friends realized that he didn't want to pursue the subject. "So how many rejections did you get today?" Lexi greeted her daughter with such hurtful words. Ellen regretted 100 times that she had prematurely initiated her mother into her plans. She didn't realize how many nerves she'd wind up on her mother's angry tongue. She knew her mother had never spared her. But that she could speak such derogatory words, Ellen didn't expect that. "Ma, have you decided to wear me out with your insults?" She couldn't stand it. "Foolish, my poor daughter. I'm trying to set you on the right path," Lexi said more gently. Ellen had a paycheck next week and Lexi had her own plans for that money. She understood that. That her daughter might get angry and her plans would be ruined. "Ellen, let's be reasonable. Why do you want to have a baby? We have a good life together. A child is a heavy burden to carry for the rest of your life. That's how I carry my burden, and I don't want you to suffer the same fate." "That's funny," Ellen laughed. "Mom, who doesn't know you in our life? I can't believe you've been busting your ass for me. I know what you care about. My money, which you spend most of the time on yourself. And when the baby comes, you'll have no access to my money," Ellen said. "So you're thinking about me?" "I don't. I know you, Mom. You've lived and lived all your life for yourself. And I'm your bank that you use. It's a good thing I was smart enough to stay in touch with Christian. Otherwise, I'd have no one to lay my head on. We're strangers, Mom. How painful it is to realize that. So you refuse to help your sick mother financially. And this is thanks to me for not putting you in boarding school. I wish you had put me in boarding school. Then I wouldn't owe you the debt you keep reminding me of. Don't be sarcastic, I'm asking you straight out. Are you refusing financial support? Mom, live on your pension like any other retiree. And if you need medicine, I'll buy it for you. If I can't live on my pension, I'll file for alimony. Lexi smiled wickedly. How about that? Suing your own mother? Do whatever you want. Ellen said tiredly, "Just don't count on my money anymore. I'll need it when the baby comes and I may have to move out." "You fool." Lexi said something mean to Ellen. "Who needs you limp? What normal man would go to bed with you?" Ellen went into the bathroom, closed the door behind her, and turned on the water so the noise would drown out her mother's words, and she couldn't hear the curses she was sending her. Leaning over the sink, Ellen stared at her reflection. A tired woman, bruises under her eyes, the corners of her lips drooping, a haggard look in her eyes. "Hello, Scarecrow," she said to herself. And the mother is not so wrong. Who needs a lame, damaged old maid? There was an unusual silence in the apartment, and it strained no less, perhaps even more than the scandals with her mother. From her mother's behavior, Ellen realized that after her violent remarks, she was silent. At Ellen's appeals, Lexi kept silent, pressed her lips together and looked away, making it clear that she was ignoring her daughter. How long this would continue was unknown. Ellen was nervous, and she no longer had any energy or thoughts about how she would meet the potential father of the child. Maybe that's what the mother was counting on, she thought. Couldn't break me with words, so she found a more effective way. Yes, with this mood, it's not just thinking about a child you don't want to live. No, contact with the mother must be limited. We have to rent a place and leave her. Otherwise, she will bring me and herself to the unknown, decided Ellen. She was interrupted from her thoughts about renting an apartment by a phone call. "Hi, why haven't you called?" Grace's friend asked. "Hello, Grace. I've been fighting with my mom and I haven't had time to call. I didn't want to ruin your mood with my problems. That's my life right now. I could hang myself. My mom's been doing so much I've decided to get my own place. I can't take it anymore." "You should have gotten away from her a long time ago," Grace said. "Maybe you could have had a baby and gotten married. You made the right decision, Ellen. Otherwise, you'll be a servant to your mother for the rest of her life. And your mommy's temper might make you lonely faster. Selfish women like her live a long time. You need help finding an apartment?" "No, I don't. I'm good. How's the baby making going?" It's not going anywhere. I tried to meet a couple friends for that. Yeah, I didn't have the guts. Couldn't connect with the guys. When I think about it, no, it's not for me." "I see," Grace said. "Listen, Ellen, why don't you try IVF? You can get embryos implanted and there's no need to look for them." "Not that, Grace. What if all the embryos survive and I have to choose which one to keep?" "No and no. And then I want to go through all the stages of motherhood from beginning to end," Ellen said. "I want to see the eyes of the father of my child." "Why do you want to see his eyes?" Grace was surprised. "As far as I know, the baby needs another organ to conceive." "Maybe you won't understand me, but in his eyes I want to see what kind of man he is. The father of my child should at least be kind." "Ellen, you'll never get pregnant for the rest of your life. And then why do you need his kindness if you're going to raise a child without his input?" "Then I can't explain." "I can't yet," Ellen answered. "Not until I take the job, I suppose." "You're not pregnant?" Grace asked. "I have a plan. My doggie's birthday is next Thursday, but the party's on Saturday. So I'll tell Timmy to invite a couple or 3 kind-eyed men, preferably single, so that you won't be bored and lonely." "How does that sound?" "That's a great idea. Why single men?" "I don't think that's really relevant here. You're not going to get married, and you're not going to hold men responsible. Not married ones, or married ones might scratch your eyes out and you wouldn't be able to see the goodness in the eyes of the one you choose," Grace laughed. "I guess you're right, friend." Ellen laughed. "That's why I love you. Grace, you can get a man out of any situation. At least I can laugh with you, because I've forgotten how to do it with my mother." "Okay, no need to thank me," Grace said. "I'm thinking we should make up a cover story. In case they ask why you're limping, there's got to be a mystery to your limp. You know how men love a mystery in a woman." "No, I don't. I wasn't a mystery woman," Ellen replied. "Let's stick to one legend, so we don't get confused." "Well, let's say you were traveling with your fiancé in your car before the wedding, and some drunk made a collision of his Jeep with your car," suggested Grace. "Your fiancé died on the spot, and you got a leg injury. You loved your fiancé so much that you never remarried. Imagine, every man would want such a mysterious, loyal woman. How's that for a story?" "A bloodier scenario," Ellen laughed. "Well, if it helps, I agree. Just don't tell everyone this legend before the time, but only when absolutely necessary. Maybe we can do without legends." Done. Waiting for a special invitation to the party. Faithful bride Grace laughed. "Bye, see you soon." Ellen was preparing thoroughly for Timmy's celebration. If she missed this chance, there would be no others. She bought a fancy new dress and shoes, even though she was going to hide her feet under the table. She made an appointment at the salon for a haircut and manicure. And all that preparation didn't escape Lexi's scrutinizing gaze. "Going hunting, honey," Lexi said Friday. "Make sure you don't miss." She didn't recognize her daughter Ellen had never been so meticulous about her appearance. And that was a bad sign for Lexi. Ellen remained silent at her mother's words. Then, to keep Lexi's mind occupied, she said, "Just so you don't get so annoyed, Mom, I'm moving out on Sunday. It's about time we got our own place." Lexi's eyes darted around. Her mouth opened and closed, but she couldn't get a word out. "Just drink some water and calm down," Ellen said. "And let's not get into this. It's irrevocably settled." Lexi took a sip of water and sat back in her chair. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. The grooming had evaporated somewhere, and almost 60 years read on her face. In that moment, Ellen felt unbearably sorry for her mother. But she realized that if she gave in to pity, her hell with her mother would continue. Ellen, like her friend, arrived at Timmy's birthday party early. She congratulated the birthday boy, helped Grace set the table, and sat down at that table, hiding her feet in her new shoes and her gait underneath. But only temporarily. After all, you can't hide a flaw like that. As soon as she got up from the table and walked, everyone would see her limping, leaning on her left foot. And no fancy dress or pretty shoes will help her. But there was still hope for a positive result in Ellen's soul. Her cheeks were flaming with excitement, her freckles gave her face a childlike innocence, and her long red hair was scattered over her shoulders. Helene's hair was always like that when she was excited. It was out of place. "She's good," Grace said. "If I were a man, I'd love you right here on this table." Ellen blushed even more. What do men look at? They look at their feet, and I'm not in the best shape. Forget about your legs tonight. Relax and attract men. You've got what it takes. Don't worry, I'm here for you. I got your back, girl. At Timmy's birthday party, there were 3 couples and 2 strange men. Ellen noticed one of them right away. He was the one she should favor. Greg the man introduced himself as a handsome man who looked like a catcher. "And for you, just Gosha." He smiled with all his magnificent teeth. He obviously knew that the ladies loved his smile. For the father of my child, he's suitable, Ellen thought. Handsome. Which means the baby will be handsome too. There's bravado and brazenness in his eyes, confidence in his irresistibility, but no anger. Let's see what happens next. Looks like they don't miss a single skirt. I hope he doesn't miss mine. The other was a little worried and clearly had some complexes, but his face was pleasant. He smiled at Ellen and introduced himself. Vincent. Vincent wanted to say something else, but Greg beat him to it. "And you, Helene?" Yes, Helene smiled. "Helene is as beautiful as a fairy tale," Greg said, and sat down at the table next to her. "Not only beautiful," said Grace, "but also wise." Ellen didn't like this presentation because everyone at the table was staring at her, and she was even more embarrassed and nervous. But then the toast to the birthday boy's health began, and Ellen slowly began to calm down. Greg was wooing her, talking and talking, clearly flirting with Ellen. He had her on the hook, and Ellen thought, just so long as he didn't snap. She flirted with Greg as best she could, and on Grace's recommendation, when she approached him, she tried to touch his hand. Across from Ellen and Greg sat Vincent. He glanced furtively at her and blushed, whether from the liquor he'd drunk or for some other reason. Vincent didn't speak to Helen the Beautiful. Greg didn't give him a chance. But when the dance began, Vincent jumped up and held out his hand to Helen. "May I invite you?" "No. No," Helene replied fearfully. "I don't dance." Vincent remained standing in front of her with his hand outstretched. Helene was embarrassed that she had partially confessed her flaw. "I'm sorry, Vincent, my leg hurts, so I'm not dancing." It was only now that she saw the man's eyes. They were full of hope that had turned to despair. He said confusedly, "It's you, Helen. I apologize. I had the audacity to hope to dance with you." He sat down at the table, poured himself a full shot of vodka, and made a toast to the birthday boy. To you, Timmy, to be loved, and that it be mutual. Otherwise it's all for nothing. Everyone supported Vincent, applauded his toast, and continued the party. Vincent got up from the table and never returned to it. He must have gone English, Ellen thought. Somehow she felt guilty that he had left. Well then, that's it, there's no one to choose from now. Greg is the only one. And he's persistent in his courtship, and has already volunteered to walk Ellen out. And that's what she wants. Today he'll see her off, and tomorrow she'll move into a rented apartment, and under the pretext of helping her, she'll invite him to visit. And then she won't have to think about it. Greg had already made up his mind for her. All evening Ellen did not leave the table. She wanted to go to the toilet, but she was patient, afraid to scare Greg. But she had to get up, and she remembered that she had told Vincent that her leg hurt, and now she could limp under that pretext. "Sprained my leg," Helen said, as if to justify herself to Greg as they got out to get into a cab. "A sprain. Now I'm a limp leg." She laughed, and Greg laughed too, and then he picked Ellen up in his arms and kissed her on the lips and said, "What am I to do? Carry you in my arms, my Ellen the beautiful." It took Lexi a long time to fall asleep. Such attention to her appearance Ellen had never paid before. She must have had a man on her horizon and decided to have a baby. Lexi can't resist her daughter's desire to have a baby. If her daughter moves out on her, it's over. Ellen will be out of her control forever, and the money will be gone too. And what will she be able to afford in retirement? Nothing. And if her daughter stays with her, she'll have to pay the utilities and buy groceries. She's not going to take a bite out of her mom's mouth, and Lexi would save her pension for a vacation. She didn't see any other way out. She had to stop her daughter from leaving her. Tomorrow, Lexi decided I would cry and beg her to stay with me. I'll push pity, Lexi thought, and Ellen, the pitying one, will cool down. She wouldn't be so adamant. So far, Lexi had managed to manipulate her daughter, so she didn't give up hope. Sleep wouldn't come with the worry that she could lose everything. Absolutely everything she could afford. Her throat was already dry. She went to the kitchen for a drink of water. The window was open, and she heard a car pull up to the driveway. Lexi looked out and saw it was a cab with a man jumping out of it. He walked around the car, opened the back door, gave someone a hand, and Ellen stepped out of the car. The man put his arm around Ellen and pulled her to him. What was moving Lexi? She quickly threw on a robe, sprinting out to the entryway. The man was kissing Ellen. She was hugging him. "Oh, Lexi," the young man exclaimed when he saw her. Ellen and he flinched and recoiled from each other. The young man stepped closer. "Lexi," he said, "I hope you have serious intentions for my lame daughter, or are you just trying to make fun of her?" Ellen's face flashed as if she'd been doused with boiling water. Greg didn't know what to say. "I don't know what your intentions are," Lexi continued. "Ellen's intentions are that she doesn't care who she has a baby with. She doesn't know what she's doing. Age, you know, is driving her. She decided to have it for herself. But it is not certain that in the future she will not hold you responsible, if you, of course, fall for her tricks." Ellen was ready to fall to the ground at her mother's words. She, presented with humiliation, said nothing, and went to the front door of the driveway. Her mother stayed with Greg and said something to him, but Ellen couldn't hear anything and didn't want to. Such shame she had never felt before. "Run, run," the thought pounded in her head. "Run wherever I am, or she will drive me to I don't know what." While Ellen was getting dressed, Lexi came back from the street. "How could you embarrass me like that?" Ellen asked quietly, almost in a whisper. There was a lump in her throat that prevented her from not only speaking, but even breathing. "A daughter." Lexi suddenly burst into tears. "Maybe I'm not so right, but I don't want you to get hurt later. The world of men is so cruel." Lexi rushed to hug her daughter, but Ellen pushed her away. "Get your hands off me," she said. "Don't come near me. I'm so tired of you." With these words, Helene went to the bathroom, turned on the water so she wouldn't hear her mother's wailing, and, as always, asked her reflection in the mirror, "Well, Are you happy that you found a contender for the baby's father? It was your last chance to realize your dream after all. She grabbed a heavy glass soap dish and threw it at the mirror. The mirror shattered and the shards sprinkled at Ellen's feet. She picked up one shard and brought it to her hand where the blue wreath pulsed. Now interrupt that mole too. There will be nothing, no limp leg, no pain, no shame. And there would be no baby. Someone was breaking at the door, shouting something, but Ellen didn't hear. Thoughts of the baby stopped her for a second. Nausea came to her throat, and she leaned over the sink. She threw up. She gripped the mirror shard so tightly she hurt her hand. Blood dripped into the sink. Her thoughts blurred, but thoughts of her baby kept her from following through. Her baby, who was in her thoughts, was now saving her. And Ellen suddenly realized that he was saving her so she could give him life. My baby, she whispered. Tears rolled down her cheeks in hail. The tension eased. She opened the door and stepped out. The horror. Lexi gasped. Who's going to buy a mirror now? No one, Ellen replied. Here's what happened next. Ellen went to her room and propped the door open with a bulky chair to keep her mother out. She had been packing since morning. By 9 o'clock a cab was to arrive, and that was it. Goodbye to the past life. Hello, new one, Ellen thought. For a fee, the cab driver helped her carry her things into the rented apartment. Then Katya called. Well, tell me about it. She poured questions. Did the bow fall for you like a boy? Even your legends did not need? How? His eyes are kind or not, laughed friend. Katya, I'm already in the new apartment I rented. Do you want to come to my place and celebrate the housewarming? I'll pick up a cake. Vasya, don't talk to me like that. I don't care about your cake. What I'm interested in is, did our plan work? Why aren't you talking? Vasya, are you crying? Did he hurt you? I'll be right over, send me the new address. An hour later, Katya showed up on the doorstep with a bottle of cognac and started praising Greg without any preamble. What a freak. You can't say that. Now we'll treat your stress. And she put the bottle on the glass coffee table. Do you have glasses for this drink in the house? I don't know yet. We'll see, Ellen answered. Katya stirred up the cognac. And you need a double dose, she decided. Men's offenses are cured only with a double dose of cognac. Can you believe me? I've taken a lot of shit from men. Oh, I've got a lemon in my bag and a chocolate bar, a noble snack for cognac. Soon they were getting tipsy, and it was getting easier. Drinking cognac, taking it as a medicine for the soul. Ellen told Katherine how her mother had embarrassed her in front of Greg. Wow, stretched Katya. Why do you put up with it, Vasya? Immediately expel yourself from your mother. Do you realize what she's driven you to? To suicide? Come on, let's have another round. It's a stress reliever. Okay, men, to hell with them. But your own mother doing this to you. It's unbelievable. I'm already drunk, Helene laughed. Helene was already smiling. The medicine is working. Let's have another drink, Grace suggested. That's enough. Just eat your appetizer. Why did Ellen obey Grace? She didn't know, but the cognac made her feel better. You see, Grace, it was my last chance, she sighed. What am I supposed to do now? What you need to do now is calm down, get some rest, clean yourself up. I'll figure something out. I'll check things out with Stas. Maybe Greg isn't such a hopeless case. Maybe everything can be fixed. I tried to encourage my friend. We can still fight. I'm not a village, Ellen muttered sullenly. You didn't sleep last night, did you? Grace asked. Not much. Well, that's fine. There's a warm bed here with fresh linen. Get some sleep now. I'll call you tonight. I've got to go home now, or Timmy's going to give me a hard time. Then I'll have to be treated. Grace laughed and walked out. Ellen woke up around 4 in the evening. Strangely enough, there was no sign of a hangover. She felt rested and alert. She hadn't had time to clean up since this morning, so she started it now. Tomorrow was work. The weekend was over. Ellen realized she was content not to see or talk to her mother. She remembered that when Grace left, she'd put her phone on silent. As soon as she turned it on, it rang. Mom popped up on the screen. So many calls from her mother during the day that Ellen didn't even bother counting them. She pressed disconnect and blocked her mother from the phone. Not now, Ellen thought. I can't even hear her voice. Late that night, Grace called. How are you doing? Are you back to normal? Did you get a nice apartment? Is it cozy? I'm here, Ellen said. I'm all cleaned up. I'm just sitting here enjoying the solitude. I've blocked my mom and somehow I don't feel guilty. Good for you. Take a break from each other and keep your toxic mom at a distance. Grace continued. Well, I'll tell you what, Ellen. Don't you relax at all. Get yourself some fancy clothes for your closet. Get some masks, some creams. Take care of yourself. You and I are on the path to cloudless love. We'll figure out what to do next. We women are the kind of people who don't just give up. You'll have a child, I'm telling you. I won't be me if we don't find you a man with kind eyes. Any other wishes, Helena the Beautiful? Grace laughed. No more, laughed Helen, except to come with me to the store and help me choose a closet. That would be my pleasure. I love shopping, even if it's not for myself. So, Ellen, are you ready to go to the beauty ball? Well, what ball? Ellen was surprised. Grace, couldn't you think of something more appropriate for me? What kind of ball would I go to with my legs? Wait, have you seen the movie Cinderella? What does that have to do with it? It does. So when I'm in a bad mood or depressed, I watch this fairy tale. By the way, I recommend it for self-esteem. It's exactly what all women should watch. I don't get it, Ellen said, confused. But look, Cinderella there all the time doing something, cooking. In short, working like a slave in the galleys. And her stepmother gives her so many tasks that she can't even go and look at the ball of her dreams from afar. What does her godmother tell her? Grace asked. What does she say? Well, she says it's very hurtful not to go to the prom, especially when you deserve it. And I realize I'm the Cinderella who works hard for her family. And it's bad for me not to go to the ball because I deserve it. And I'm going to the ball. I've never noticed that about you, Ellen said doubtfully. Grace continued. Do you go to discos? No, my children already go to discos. And my ball is shopping or beauty salon. Those are my balls. That's where I feel like a princess, not a dirty Cinderella. Long story short, I'll meet you at 6 p.m. outside the Marion Mall. We're going to make a princess out of you. You ready? I'm ready, replied Ellen. Ellen and Grace walked around the mall from one store to another, and as they shopped, their mood improved. Satisfied with their purchases, they went to a cafe in the same center for coffee and sweets. I didn't want to upset you right away, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what Timmy and Greg said, Grace began, sipping her coffee. It's not going to work. It's a hopeless case. Your mother's done her best. Ellen, don't be discouraged. If it's a holiday on your street, it'll be a holiday on your street. I'm not despairing, Helen said. Even if Greg wanted to meet me, I do not know how I would look in his eyes. So Grace, relax. Relax. We're at a ball. The next night after going to the mall, Grace called. Here's the thing, Ellen. She began excitedly. She could hear that she was excited and eager to share the news. Hello to you too. Hello, Helene replied calmly. Oh, hello. There's such news. Grace continued. Tell me at once, are you standing or sitting? And without waiting for an answer, she began her fiery speech. If you're standing, you better sit down or you're going to fall, girl. What else is there? Helene couldn't take it anymore. Speak already. Stop pouring water. You know who came to see me at work today? Grace, just tell me. What am I supposed to do with this riddle? Vincent came by, and he came for you. Ellen had a picture of Vincent standing in front of her with his hand out. What do you mean, for my sake? She asked, perplexed. That's what it might look like after editing. And the fact that he asked for your phone number means you shouldn't ignore strange calls, Grace continued. I don't know if he'll have the guts to call you tonight. He seems confused, probably shy or insecure. Well, just like you. I didn't want to give him your number at first. I thought I'd get it from you. Whether I could or not, he insisted, Grace said. I don't get it now, Ellen said. You just said he was shy or insecure, and suddenly he was pushing you. And he said to me as soon as I saw Ellen, I knew she was my woman. Please, Grace, help me. I have a lot to say to her, that's how he put it. Is it possible to say things like that? Ellen's cheeks flared as if she'd gotten too close to the flames. Her heart raced with excitement. Could a man really like her? And not just for one night. She didn't believe it, but she wanted to believe it. Why don't you say something, Helene? Or don't you like his eyes? Grace asked. Grace, I'm so confused right now, Ellen smiled to herself. His eyes are kind but sad. Can anyone really like me? You both have kind but sad eyes. Maybe that's why you need each other. Grace said thoughtfully. Listen to me, Ellen. He doesn't just like you. Do you hear me, Ellen? He said he's sure you're his woman. And that's a lot more than just liking you. Are you happy? I don't know yet, Helene answered. Don't scare this male away. At least use him as a donor. Does he know I have a limp? Helene suddenly realized. I'm sorry, friend, but I told him our legend, and I think he liked it. And he's not going to give up on you. On the contrary, he's even more interested in you. Ellen, I'll tell you something else. He knows what your mom told Greg. And you know what he said? That he's willing to grant you your wish, and he wants to take responsibility because he wants a baby too. This is what it might look like when it's edited. That's awful, Ellen said. How embarrassing. It's nothing to be ashamed of, said Grace confidently. He is ready to love you with all your faults and peculiarities. Love is out of the question now, said Ellen. How stupid you are, Helen. And I read you the wisdom. And this is the real love, without any conventions. When you're loved not for something, but against all odds. Of course, such love is rare, but I think you deserve it.
That's it. No more arguments. Wait for the call, Grace said firmly.
That's Grace. Neither hello nor goodbye, Ellen thought. But I'm so grateful to fate for my only friend. They'd been friends since they were students. Ellen, with her complexes, somehow fenced off friendships with her classmates, but Grace, with her assertiveness, was impossible to fence off. And Ellen was grateful for that. Vincent didn't call that day or the next. Helene had thought he'd analyzed everything after his conversation with Grace and decided not to contact her. But she was wrong. He did call. Ellen, hello. It's Vincent. You probably don't remember me, do you? Hello, Vincent. I remember you. I'm sorry I didn't get to dance with you. I have a leg. Don't make excuses, I know. It doesn't matter. I want to see you and have a lot to say to you. That's what matters. Do you want to come to my place? Ellen has the courage to offer. And we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. And I wanted to ask you out. I'm tired, Helene admitted. She didn't want to beat around the bush. She wanted a baby. And then it's up to her. I'm tired too. A lot of work. So I'm coming to you, Vincent decided. Sure. I'll drop you the address, Helen agreed. Are the flowers for me? She asked hesitantly, clutching a bouquet of fragrant white peonies to her chest. I'll give them to you often, Vincent promised. This is what it might look like after editing. If you let me, I will. Come in. Vincent, do you want tea? I will. I have a lot to tell you, Ellen. I've been thinking for a long time, so don't interrupt me, Vincent asked. All right, if you say so, Helene agreed. I know you want a baby, and I want it just as much as you do, so I'm ready. Oh, that's not what I'm saying. Anyway, I want us to be together. And the baby is secondary. No, of course. And the baby is secondary. Well, I'm confused now, Vincent said, blushing. Anyway, as soon as I saw you, I knew I wanted to live with you and grow old with you. Is that a declaration of love or a marriage proposal? Really? Ellen asked. It's both an explanation and a proposal, Vincent replied. But we don't really know each other, said Helene. We have our whole lives ahead of us. We'll find out. It was only when I saw you that I thought I had known you for a long time. Let's not be in a hurry, Ellen asked. I mean with marriage. And the baby? Vincent asked. With the baby, we have to hurry, Helene said in a businesslike manner. She came very close to Vincent and looked into his eyes and remarked, "Good eyes." She wished her child had such eyes. Vincent put his arms around her and whispered softly in her ear so that no one would hear. My Helen the beautiful. And then the love of two adults turned into a passion that consumed both Helen and Vincent and carried their bodies into the world where the sacrament of the child's conception begins. Vincent. Vincent. Helene shouted to her husband, who was standing under the windows of the hospital. Look, it's our son. Tears of happiness and love for the baby and her husband flowed down her cheeks. Vincent, he has eyes like yours. Can you hear me? And his hair is red like mine. I can hear you, Vincent smiled. I'll hear you always and everywhere. My Helen the beautiful. Grace heard a familiar voice behind her. Grace. It's so good to see you. Lexi rushed over to Grace with a hug and even wept. Something Ellen's mom had never been sentimental about, and she'd always looked down on Grace. And now this. Wondrous are thy works, O Lord. Grace thought about the change in Lexi. I can't believe I had to go to this meeting, she lamented. Hello, Lexi. How did you end up in this neighborhood? Grace didn't know what to talk to Lexi about and realized the stupidity of the question. It was Pete's birthday. I decided to come to this mall and buy him a present. There are so many different departments, I'll find something interesting, Lexi replied. Pete. What's this new character I'm hearing about for the first time? Grace thought, but didn't dare ask. She wanted to get away from Lexi as soon as possible, knowing that she would start pestering her with questions about Ellen. Grace, I'm inviting you to the cafe here on the first floor. I'm so happy to see you. I just want to sit with you and drink coffee and talk about this and that. Lexi persisted. That's exactly what Grace didn't want. But I'm in a hurry. I just ran in here for a minute. And my son, remember, he picked out his sneakers, put them aside. So I came by to buy them back. I won't keep you long, Grace began to justify herself. Don't you have 20 or 30 minutes for your friend's mom? Lexi asked in a very pathetic tone. Okay, half an hour, I guess. Grace gave in. They drank coffee and cakes, and Grace looked at Lexi and thought, yeah, it's a little less glamorous. Ellen's lack of money has taken a toll on her mom's looks. How is Ellen doing? Lexi finally asked, staring at Grace. She's doing well, she said shortly. It's a dream come true, Lexi said cryptically. It has, Lexi continued. Ellen's son is so cute and funny. And then Grace burst into tears. A redhead like Ellen. I love him. And his name is Alex. She named him after her father who left her. Grace didn't know what to say to Lexi. She's been living in apartments with the baby, Lexi continued. It's like I'm her enemy and she doesn't have a home. No, not us. She got married and her husband has a 2-bedroom apartment. Lexi went completely numb from the shock. She leaned over to her cup of coffee and drank it in one fell swoop like water. It was obvious from everything that Grace had shocked her with this news. Divorced and delinquent on child support. Ellen's hubby. Lexi asked angrily. He's probably sucking on her like a leech and sucking money out of her. There's plenty of men like that around. Yeah, you were a leech, Grace thought. There's a lot of them out there. He's divorced, but he's not in arrears. And he's got a good paying job. Ellen's a rock, Grace smiled. I'm so happy for her. You've added fuel to the fire, Grace thought. Lexi suddenly burst into tears, almost to the point of tears. She left her old mom and she's living in chocolate and doesn't even think about me. Maybe I'm starving. Maybe I need medicine. Maybe I'm not alive anymore. She wailed. Something doesn't fit with Lexi being in as much distress as she describes, Grace thought. She came to an expensive mall to get a gift and invited me to a coffee shop. Don't cry, Lexi, you should be happy that Ellen is doing well, Grace reassured her. And is she? Lexi persisted. How does she live with not talking to her mother and Grace? Grace wanted to tell her that everything was fine without her. But she didn't dare. You never know what Lexi's going to say when she hears that. Married me, huh? You had to get married, Lexi said in a high-pitched tone. And at my age, why should I? Congratulations. Grace was genuinely surprised. It's wonderful. You're not alone. You have support, Grace said. God forbid I have support, Lexi said. But I didn't have a choice. I had to get married. I guess you could say Ellen pushed me into it. Is he a bad man? Alcoholic, greedy? Hurt you? Grace was now curious about Lexi's husband. He's ex-military, retired colonel. But as you know, there's no such thing as ex-military. No, he's not a drunk. He's not greedy. His pension is good. We live at my place. We also rent his apartment. It's okay. But I live like I'm in the army, Grace. Anything goes wrong, all I hear is, stand down, round and round. Grace could barely contain her laughter. That's exactly the kind of husband Lexi needed to put the brakes on her hubris and selfishness. He's used to being in charge. Now he's got me under his command. Lexi kept complaining. He's nagging me about not talking to Ellen. And it's not easy for me to be in a quarrel with Ellen. My son and grandchildren come to see me, but my daughter doesn't. Grace, I beg you, please help us to reconcile with Helen. Then at least Vincent won't nag me about it, Lexi asked. Nothing has changed, Grace thought. Even now, Lexi's not thinking about her daughter and grandchild, but about making sure Vincent doesn't nag her for fighting with her daughter. Tell her to call me and I'll be waiting. Help me, Grace. I'll try, but I can't promise anything. I'm afraid you've pushed her too far away from you. We have to take the first steps toward each other. And I'm ready. I just don't have her contacts. Otherwise, Vincent would have dragged me to Helen, Grace said. Vincent was intriguing her more and more. She couldn't resist asking. How did you meet your husband? At the resort. I'd been seeing him for 6 years. He's a widower and kept trying to marry me. But I kept putting it off, Lexi explained. I knew a man was a lot of work, Grace snickered. And you're not used to hard work. All right, well, it was good to see you, she changed her tone. I'll tell Ellen I saw you and that you're waiting for her call. Goodbye, Lexi. I'll be waiting, Lexi shouted after her. Well, Ellen, we should call Mom, Grace pondered. She's going to be waiting, no matter what. I'm afraid, Ellen admitted. I'm afraid she might ruin what I have now. I feel sorry for her, and I have often thought of reconciliation. And Vincent says you can't choose your mothers, you have to reconcile. But every time I think of what she's done to me, I don't want to take that step. Don't be afraid, Helene, Vincent said. She won't destroy what we have between us. But you'll feel better if you make peace with your mother. At peace? Helene asked doubtfully. By all means. A bad peace is better than a good quarrel. And then there's Commander-in-Chief Pete. I don't know what his middle name is, but he keeps Lexi's battles going, Grace laughed. Hello, Mom. Ellen called Lexi. Daughter, it's so good to hear from you, came Lexi's voice. Pete sat next to her and nodded his head in satisfaction. Lexi looked at her husband with a sidelong glance. She wanted so badly to express her grievances, but with Pete around, the chances were nil. Daughter, I'm so excited to see you, to meet your husband, to hold Alex in my arms. If you knew how much I miss you. You know I got married too, right? You should meet Pete. He's a wonderful man. No more eulogies, Pete said loudly. Ellen heard his commanding voice and smiled. Finally, someone can control Mom's temper. Daughter, Pete and I are expecting you on Sunday. Will you come? Lexi asked. No more questions. Pete's voice came again. Yes, I'll talk to Vincent, Ellen answered. Hello, Ellen. I'm Pete, a retired colonel and Lexi's husband. Lexi and I are expecting on Sunday. No refusal is accepted, Pete Kondratievich said confidently. Okay, Vincent? We'll come. We'll definitely come, Vincent smiled. seeing how Pete had the situation under control. "We'll be waiting. Goodbye." Pete said goodbye and handed the phone to Lexi. "I'm so glad, my daughter." Tears of joy rolled down Lexi's cheeks. "See you later." She pressed disconnect. "No more tears," Pete said, smiling. "They ruin a girl's beauty." He hugged Lexi convincingly. She rested her head on his shoulder, and in that moment was grateful for her husband's support. "We need to get groceries for the table," Lexi said, coming to her senses. "We'll go tomorrow. We'll get everything." Pete nodded. "Are you okay? I see your face is red. Let's take your blood pressure, or we won't have guests coming to our house but to your hospital." Pete kept a close eye on his wife's condition, concerned for her health. His determination and concern helped Lexi keep the situation under control. After learning that her husband had a mistress, the wife did not make a fuss, but did something different. They'd been estranged for a long time. Not anymore. Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, and they were left alone in a huge house, where each could get lost and not see the other. They didn't talk to each other for days at a time, not because they were fighting, but because they were strangers. For 22 years of life together, they never became close. On the contrary, with each passing year, they grew farther and farther apart. Of course, they could have broken up a long time ago, but something kept them apart, especially in the mornings. Ajay couldn't see Olivia sleeping. It was a good thing it was dark at night, and he couldn't see her in her sleep with her mouth open, breathing loudly, sometimes even snoring. How ugly is she when she sleeps? Ugly to the point of nausea. But when she woke up first, she was not one iota more beautiful. EJ knew in advance that when he showered, he would go into the kitchen and see her sloppy, in a hastily thrown-on robe, her hair disheveled, bunched up and tied with a rubber band, her cigarette in her hands, and a mug of coffee. Not a cup, but a mug. "Can we not smoke in the kitchen?" Ajay will ask again. Or he won't say anything at all, and won't even look in her direction. "Where should I smoke?" Olivia asks. And he won't answer her question. He just doesn't want a morning argument that will wear out his nerves and ruin his mood. Ajay had a quick breakfast and left for work. He had to be there by 8, Olivia by 9. It used to be that when Bridget lived with them, her daughter or Ajay would make breakfast. The two of them would eat breakfast together, and there would be a semblance of family. Now even that was gone. The dead house had finally died with Bridget gone. At night, Olivia made attempts to get closer to Ajay, at least physically. And there, lo and behold, she'd crawl under her husband's blanket, put her arms around him, kiss his shoulder, and try to grope his flesh. Dona Ajay brushes her hand away. Everything is calm in Baghdad. Olivia laughs angrily. "You impotent wretch. You think I don't know you only get it up for your mistresses? I hate you." "Let's get a divorce," Ajay once again suggests. "No way. No way. You'll thank me that I didn't want to divorce you. Divide the house, divide the property. And this is when we have everything. Live and be happy." Somehow there's no joy. There's nothing to be happy about, Olivia. And you need to finally realize that. I've been ready for a divorce for a long time. I don't want to fight. Ajay interrupts. I want things to be peaceful so that Bridget can. "Shut up. We're going to have grandchildren any day now." "And what? You and me? They'll come separately to the cramped apartments we can afford after we divide the property." I wanted to live a selfish life for myself. You were, and you still are. You know, the time will come when you won't be able to stop me. Divorce is imminent. It hasn't come yet. What's keeping you? Bridget. I am. I want an amicable divorce. Bridget and Virginia, Ajay thought and smiled. If Virginia agreed, he would have divorced Olivia long ago. It was a good thing Olivia hadn't seen him smile, or there would have been a scandal. She hated it when he smiled, thinking he was thinking about his mistress. And she wasn't wrong. Not about a mistress, but about the one and only one he loved. And he didn't need any others. Virginia, hello, my love. I miss you as much as Danielle. Vacation. Freedom. Daniel's doing great, only 1B in English. He's going to Grandma's after tomorrow. So you're free, and I'm free. Olivia left for her mother's yesterday. Will you come over? Can you make it? Ajay wrote. Well, I don't know, Virginia smiled to herself. You know what would agree? How many years have they been dating? And she always goes to Ajay's place like it's a first date. It's about time they got used to each other for so many years. It's even time to get used to each other. But no, it's not working out for either Virginia or Ajay. Virginia, I miss you. Come to my place, come on, I'll be waiting for you, said Ajay. You don't have to meet me, it will attract attention. I'm tired of hiding and I don't want that. I'll meet you at 6:30 outside your office. And that's it, he insisted. Come on, you're driving me away. If I wait for you, I'll pass you by, Virginia objected. I'm not kidding, Ajay. I'll walk by like I don't know you. Let's keep it simple. I have to go home after work. Don't forget, besides Daniel, I have a cat named Thomas. And he's waiting for me. I'll take a cab myself. Am I doing your bidding again? Ajay laughed. Well, I guess that's the fate of some men, to wait for their sweethearts. Virginia, life is so short, and we're all waiting for something, he sighed. What are you starting, Ajay? Everything has been said and decided long ago. Everything will be as it is, Virginia said. I love you. I love you. And I'll never stop telling you that, Virginia, he said. Usually men say it before, Virginia joked. You say it after. You're not the right kind of lover. I've always said it, and I'll keep saying it until you get tired of it, Ajay smiled. Don't expect I won't, Virginia smiled back. He saw her smile even in the dark and kissed the corner of her lips. I'm glad I'll wake up with you in the morning. You don't realize how beautiful you are when you sleep. I've been looking at you and looking at you and looking at you. They say when you not only want to fall asleep but also wake up with that person, that's true love. Virginia, you're the one I want to wake up with every morning, Ajay said. You're at it again, Ajay, over and over again. Why doesn't Virginia tell Daniel you're his father? You tell him stories about a father who doesn't exist. And yet you're right there with us, and yet you're far away from us. Who needs that? Virginia, I want to be with you all the time, to take care of you every day. All women dream of that, but you don't. I can see you're worried about a difficult situation, Virginia. And you have serious concerns about how you're going to talk about it and what the repercussions will be for those around you. You know why I can't tell you now. And it's for the best, Virginia said. It's still a deception, no matter how you look at it. You think this deception is your way of keeping my marriage to Olivia alive. It's long gone. You of all people know that. Bridget's an adult with her own life. I don't see how we're going to be able to tell everyone. She asked glumly. Do you have any idea how many people we'd hurt? How many people we'd make unhappy? Olivia, her mother, Bridget, my parents, Daniel. There's no telling who else will be in this line because of the two of us. A lot of people's lives will change. And the fact that I'm sleeping with you, my best friend's husband, and she doesn't know. I'm sure she's complaining to you about how impotent I am, that I have tons of mistresses. Doesn't that change someone's life? Listening to her, you must sympathize. And she doesn't suspect a thing, Virginia continued. I wonder what you told her about Daniel's father? I told her it was a resort affair. And everyone's blind, they can't see that he looks like you. Or they don't want to see. I don't know. They do. They don't, but it's more peaceful. Can you imagine the town turning against my parents when they find out I stole my husband from my best friend who I grew up with since I was a kid? Okay, other people. But Olivia's mother is my parents' neighbor. How are they supposed to live with their houses next to each other? Virginia asked Ajay. How, Ajay, can you answer all my questions for me? And how do I explain to Daniel that Uncle Ajay is not only Bridget's dad, but also his dad? What about us, Virginia? Ajay sighed. We don't. Soon you won't need sex, and you'll start to forget about me. What's that got to do with it? Virginia wondered. You see, I'm getting older. I don't want to be with Olivia. I want to be with you. I'm going to be a boring old woman. Virginia tried to turn the conversation into a joke. I'll be nagging you, shuffling my feet. Perhaps I will sing ugly, weak because of my weak voice. Then you'll realize what a mistake you've made, said Virginia. Falling for my charms when you were young. What about Olivia? Does she smoke? Does she drink her coffee? That's the way she's always been. That's the way she'll always be. And if you don't touch her, she won't touch anyone. And I want you to touch me and grumble. And I'd hug you and smile, and you'd stop grumbling, she continued. And tomorrow I'll turn you on your side, and you'd stop singing. And that you'll be ugly, I'll never believe that. You'll always be beautiful to me. All right, AJ, let's make a bet. It's almost morning. Let's do it. I love waking up first and watching you sleep. He kissed her on the temple, and she woke up, reached up and hugged him. Is that what you're doing to me? AJ smiled and hugged Virginia. I gotta go, Virginia said, trying to get out of his embrace. Olivia is on the first bus to arrive. She told me about it. Do you think she guesses and warned me on purpose? I don't know what she knows or doesn't know. We hardly talk to her, AJ replied. We'll get there in time, he said. AJ put his arms around Virginia and drew her to that height, that flight of feeling, where not only their bodies but their souls join. And right then, just in that moment, he felt that he and Virginia were one, inseparable. And now Virginia cried out and gratefully embraced AJ. But the brightness of the orgasm was beginning to fade from the altitude in which they had taken flight. They were returning to everyday life. And now Virginia cried out and her body tensed. But unlike before, her arms didn't wrap around his neck. They slid off his shoulders. Virginia's body shuddered, and her frightened, fixed eyes stared at AJ with a glazed look. And he suddenly realized that she was not breathing. Virginia, Virginia, shouted AJ, and began to shake her, trying to bring her back to life. He started CPR, but nothing worked. EJ called an ambulance and tried to breathe life into Virginia until it arrived. There's an ambulance outside our gate. Do you know who to see? The first thing Olivia asked when she entered the house. EJ stood at the window and, without turning around at his wife's voice, answered. To our place. Who? Us. Olivia wondered. Over there, he nodded toward the bedroom. Virginia's in there. He turned, and Olivia saw that AJ was crying. He wiped the tears from his face with a quick motion and looked at Olivia in silence. She had never seen EJ cry before, and it struck her as much as Virginia and the EMTs in their bedroom. Without a word, Olivia opened the door with a sharp movement and saw her friend's naked body on the floor and the doctors putting some instruments into their cases. Why is she on the floor? Olivia asked, shocked. Apparently it was easier for the man to perform CPR that way, the doctor answered and added, she's dead. The cause of death will be determined by the medical examiner. We've already called there. They'll come for the body soon. She's dead, Olivia said confusedly as she came out of the bedroom. She slumped into a chair and pulled cigarettes out of her purse with a trembling hand. I know, AJ answered without turning to look at his wife. There was silence. AJ was grateful that she wasn't interrogating him right now. He heard the coffee machine turn on. Apparently a cigarette without coffee was unusual for Olivia. Olivia noisily sipped her coffee and flapped her nose. Crying? AJ wondered. Didn't she understand anything? Olivia was indeed crying. Turning to her, he saw her wiping away her tears and blowing her nose loudly into her handkerchief. What's going to happen now? Without looking at her husband, she asked. I have to meet Daniel tonight. He's there, at Virginia's parents'. I have to tell her parents. Can you do that? I can do that. I'll let them know. Thank you. For what? Thank you for not asking me anything. We'll talk about it later. There's nothing to talk about, Olivia said. Olivia took a deep breath and said, If I've been silent all this time, it's not because I'm so stupid that I can't see what's going on. I've seen it all, and I see it all. Is Daniel your son? You don't have to answer that. I already know he's your son. But we'll talk about that later, not now. Thank you, Olivia, Jay said. The car from the morgue arrived. Virginia's naked body was carried past Ajay and Olivia. It's over, Olivia said. She's not coming back here. Why did you say that, Olivia? Why? Ajay asked. To make you feel better. We're burying Virginia. You look like you've lost it. Her parents are elderly. We'll have to make the funeral arrangements. They'll probably want to bury her in her home village. I hope you realize no one wants all these juicy details for their own peace of mind. No one wants the truth. Not Virginia's mother, not her parents. And neither do Daniel and Bridget. And I thought it was time Daniel knew I was his father, Ajay said. Not now. The boy is 11 years old, his mother's dead, and now you're the father. Not now, Olivia objected. How do we explain that Virginia died in our house? Let's say she didn't know I'd gone to my parents' house and came to see me. She got sick, and while the ambulance was on its way. A doctor again, and a doctor when she's gone. Vika, you understand. I loved her, and I love her, Ajay said in a shaky voice. It hurt Olivia to hear it, but she wasn't going to make a scandal. She'd always been strong, and now more than ever, she needed to stand firm, not comfort her flailing husband. Stop being hysterical, Olivia said harshly. Don't you think I should be the one throwing tantrums, not you? You've always been a rock, impenetrable, indifferent. There's nothing feminine about you. Why should I love you? You're like a tank. Ajay wanted to say something, but he was stopped by a slap from Olivia. He stopped talking and stared at his wife with tears in his eyes. And then he calmed down. Keys to the apartment, Olivia demanded. Virginia, do you have keys? Olivia asked. Yes, go to the train station to pick up Bridget. Get some things for him at the apartment and come here. Will you be able to tell the baby? Ajay asked. No, I can't. How? How am I going to tell him? Olivia replied. I knew it. I'll have to go with you. Where's Mom? Daniel was surprised to see Uncle Ajay with Aunt Olivia. Come on, Daniel, let's go to the car. I'll explain everything to you, Olivia hugged the child. An unsuspecting Daniel smiled and looked at Uncle EJ. AJ turned away from the boy and cried. Did something happen? Daniel realized. Mommy, where's Mommy? The child asked with concern in his voice, tormenting EJ's soul. You what? Danielle shouted. Are you what? Where's Mommy? Mommy's not here anymore, replied Olivia. What do you mean, gone? You're what? Daniel shouted. People at the train station began to pay attention to them. Mom is dead, replied Olivia and hugged Daniel. The boy pushed Olivia away and ran, but she quickly caught up with him and hugged him tightly, not allowing him to break free. She looked at Ajay reproachfully. Not everyone is as tough as you are, Olivia said to him. Why are you standing there like that? They're waiting in the car. I hope I don't have to run with you. About 10 minutes later, Ajay and Olivia returned. The boy was crying his eyes out. Olivia hugged him, pulled him close and stroked his head the whole way. Pulmonary embolism. Cardiac arrest, instant death. That was the cause of Virginia's death. She was buried, as Olivia had expected, in her home village, where she had been born and where her parents had lived. Daniel stayed with his grandparents for the rest of the summer vacation. They had taken custody of him, and from the end of August, at Olivia's insistence, Daniel would have to live in her and Ajay's house. Why would he want to change from a city school to a country school? There are teachers and kids there that Daniel is used to. As a teenager, it's stressful for a child. Olivia argued. It wasn't enough for him to be stressed by his mother's death. Aunt Mary, Uncle Bill. Well, it's not like he's going to live from strangers. Then again, you're elderly people. Can you handle it? Olivia objected. Why, Olivia, why would you need such a burden? We're his relatives, we're his guardians, said Virginia's father. It is impossible for us to move to a one-room apartment in the city in our old age. Here on Earth we have lived all our lives, and here we will die. We need to think about Daniel now, not about whose blood related to whom, Olivia said. He's not a little boy anymore. Let's ask him what he thinks about it. No, I'm just going to my class. What about it? Daniel replied, confused, realizing that was impossible. Uncle AJ and I want you to live with us, Daniel. Then you can go to your own school and be in your own class. Can we do that? Daniel hesitated. You can and you should. But are we strangers to you? Thank you, Aunt Olivia. Daniel smiled and hugged Olivia. Ajay, what do you say? You're all quiet. Would Daniel be a burden to you? Virginia's mom asked. No, we're great friends of Daniel's, Ajay said. I think Olivia's right. He wanted to announce to everyone that Daniel was his son. How could he be against his son? But he realized Olivia was right. Right now, we have to get past Virginia's death. The news of his paternity would be too hard on everyone. After Virginia's funeral, Ajay took a vacation and drank. He hadn't been addicted to alcohol before, but now it had become his cure for losing his beloved. Maybe it's time to stop drinking. After 2 weeks of drinking, Bridget's wife asked, "We need to fix up Daniel's room. You can drink endlessly and reach the end of the road, but it's not going to bring Virginia back. Do you need to think about your son right now?" Sobbing drunkenly, Ajay, "Daddy, you never understood me. All you ever wanted was money and nothing else. Virginia's gone and I don't want to live." If you don't want to live, then don't live. But you have to live for others, Bridget replied. What do you mean, don't live? Ajay stared at her. He poured vodka into his mug and drank it in one gulp. He wrinkled his nose and asked his wife, "Are you suggesting that I kill myself? But if you don't want to live, you have to fight it, do something, catch up with your beloved." Bridget, no insults. I understand you're going through an irreparable loss, Virginia's death, but it's wrong to vent your pain by blaming others. You're right, I didn't take responsibility for Daniel for mercenary reasons. I sincerely want him to be surrounded by care and love, to continue to learn in a familiar environment. This is now so important for the boy after the tragedy. I realize that I cannot fully understand your pain of losing the woman you love. Love is the greatest feeling that not everyone gets to experience in life. Virginia was your guiding star, and her passing has broken your heart. But the hatred and hurtful words against me are misplaced. You and I have traveled a long road together. Yes, our marriage wasn't perfect, but our son Daniel grew up in it. This is not the time for recriminations. Let's put aside past resentments and concentrate on the most important thing, our son, who was left without a mother. He needs our support and care. I say we stop fighting and get together to fix up Daniel's room. We'll renovate, create a cozy environment to make him feel at home. We'll discuss all the details. I'll allocate the necessary funds. For Daniel's sake, let's put aside our differences and join forces. It's already hard enough for the boy. Let's not add to his worries. Together we can get through this terrible grief. That's what I suggest. Bridget questioned Olivia's intentions. Why would you do that? I don't understand your diabolical schemes. How can you talk about anything when you're drunk? If you were sober, I could answer your questions. And when you're sober, I'll tell you about my diabolical schemes. I'll explain why I didn't give you a divorce. Why I didn't chase Virginia out of my house like the last creature she was. But then I'm afraid you'll lose heart. Ajay and Virginia were weak people. Two lovebirds met, but love alone is not enough to live. The weak must lean on the strong. To what? So the strong can crush them? I hate this hatred boiling up inside me. Hate is a feeling. Maybe it can sustain you in this drunken frenzy. Olivia turned on the coffee maker and lit a cigarette. She had no problem with Daniel's upbringing. Virginia seemed to have raised him right. He'd done well in school, and his teachers had praised him. At home, to Olivia's surprise, he was accustomed to independence. Like Bridget had once been, he didn't need to be reminded to keep his room in order. He was always neat. Virginia had been a perfectionist too. If she did something, she did it to perfection. But in her personal life, she had gotten Olivia's husband, who was far from perfect. But that's exactly how he seemed to Olivia. Maybe Virginia had a different opinion of him. Love is blind or blind to many things. Olivia's eyes weren't blinded by her love for EJ, and she knew he'd never loved her. He'd adored their daughter Bridget, though, for which Olivia was grateful. And until Bridget went to live with her boyfriend, divorce was out of the question. I wonder why he'd want a divorce now. Olivia thought. I mean, she was sure of herself. No, just because she'd slept with a Jay didn't mean she was going to live with him. She loved her parents very much, and as long as they were alive, she wouldn't disturb their peace with a change in her personal life. Olivia realized that Virginia's personal life consisted of more than just seeing a Jay. She was aware of that, so she was outwardly calm. She wasn't throwing tantrums or jealousy scenes. She was just keeping the situation under control. Otherwise, if Olivia made her knowledge of their connection public, it would only bring her friend closer to her husband. So she played dumb and kept her balance. Of course, it wasn't easy to smile at her bitch friend and complain to her about her impotent husband, knowing that Virginia was far from impotent. Virginia didn't seem to realize that Olivia knew about her affair with EJ. So she excitedly told her friend about her love affair with Max. Olivia, you have no idea what he's like. He loves me so much. I can't see anyone else but him. Shall I introduce you? Olivia laughed to herself, laughing and angry at the same time. He's married, don't hurt yourself, you fool. But no, he won't. Can you believe his name is a J too? I can't imagine, Olivia replied as she continued to play her part. Your husband? Yeah, but my AJ isn't as good as yours. What's wrong with your AJ? Virginia wondered. Impotent, weak. If it wasn't for me, he'd still be in his buy more. I got him into the world. Everything he's got is because of me. Why do you live with him? Virginia wondered. You talk about him like you don't love him. Why should I love him? He doesn't love me either. He's got a fool like himself on the side, and they're enjoying each other. Let them enjoy each other. But I won't give him a divorce. I didn't spend so much effort on him to give him away. Why a fool? Maybe she's the other one who's not a fool at all. You don't say. If she's in love with him, she's a fool. How can you live like this without love? I don't understand. It's easier, Olivia said sharply. Olivia retorted. But what do you have to gain from your love? See each other once or twice a week? Texting? Is that what love is for? To have each other once in a while? Then it's not love, it's just a deal. Our life is a bargain, replied Virginia. Your husband asks you while he's got something working for him, and then you're alone as a wife. Are you alone? Why alone? I have a son, Daniel. I have a daughter too, but she has her own adult life. And your Daniel won't be a child forever. There will be grandchildren, Virginia smiled dreamily. And what will you give your grandchildren? One room? I'm not divorcing my asshole so I don't have to share with him. I want to keep everything for Bridget. But you know, if you live by that standard, what kind of life is that? It's just an ordinary life, no worse than anyone else's. How do you think other people live? Floating in the clouds. Clouds are the element of birds. We humans are earthbound, materialistic creatures. You, Virginia, think about what you're saying and leave your man. Quietly find a normal man who doesn't sing your bedtime dithyrambs but earns money. I can't do that. I need love. That was the last conversation I had with Virginia. Where did she push her? To an ignominious death in someone else's bed. Once again, Olivia has to cover up her lowlife. All because she's strong, not a sissy. But Ajay, on the other hand, is distraught over the death of his beloved. And Olivia can't help him pull himself together, be strong. She's strong, and here she is, powerless after work. To sleep. As EJ said himself, he takes 2 or 3 shots of vodka, and on weekends he gets drunk to a semi-conscious state. Stop drinking. Olivia urged her husband. Daniel sees you in a bad way. Let him see what you've done to his father. You brought this on yourself, and don't open your filthy mouth about being a father. Nobody wants that, especially you. I'm lost, Olivia, a drunken AJ sobbed. My Virginia's gone, and I'm gone with her. You're going to wait for me to ask the tenants out of the apartment, and I'm going to send you there too. I'm sick of looking at your drunken face and cleaning up after your drinking. Don't clean up. I'll clean up, Olivia. Just don't move me into Virginia's apartment. I'll go crazy in there. You will. You'll end up in a mental institution. although you'll probably stop drinking there. I'm done. Olivia promised a drunken Ajay. I'm done drinking. You'll see. Promises remained promises, and Olivia continued to watch EJ drink. Bridget's entreaties didn't work on him either. Dad, maybe it's time to get treatment for alcoholism, Bridget asked. Treatment for what? What are you, daughter and mother, together? What am I, a drunk, to get treatment? Ajay was getting drunk, and no one could resist it. He was tolerated at work for a long time. But after a couple of years, when they began to notice that at work he smelled of alcohol, he called his boss, asked him to write a letter of dismissal. Daniel's son, yelled a drunken Ajay. At least you're not giving up on me, unlike Olivia. Uncle Ajay keeps saying I'm his son, Daniel said. I guess he thinks because you live with us he can think of you as his son. He gets drunk and talks nonsense. The truth is, of course, he's not your father and you're not his son. Ignore what he says, Danielle. Olivia didn't understand what money Ajay was drinking on when he was out of work. Apparently he had some savings that she didn't know about, and that worried her greatly. Spending that kind of money was incredibly stupid. At the moment, their budget wasn't big enough for him to squander that much money. Sometimes she wished he would die so she could finally breathe free and not worry about anything, and she had plenty to worry about. If Daniel was known to be Ajay's son, then he would be his father's heir too, which meant she'd have to share it with him. That's why Olivia had taken Tammy into her home to, as they say, keep her finger on the pulse. Otherwise, you never know. Maybe Ajay would start traveling to the village to see Daniel's parents from the branch, and he'd let it slip that he was Daniel's father. This way, everything's in plain sight, everything's under control. He calls Daniel's son, and she explains to the boy that it's Uncle Ajay's drunken ramblings. And she's got Ajay under her watch, everything under control. Had Ajay known that Bridget wasn't his daughter, but his old friend Mike. But she liked Mike, and he liked her. Maybe that's called love. Olivia doesn't remember anything about it now, but at the time she knew that nothing good was going to happen between her and Mike. Mike was the leader, and she was his equal. Then Olivia decided to marry the docile, quiet EJ who was graduating from college. She was glowing. You could say she'd gotten him into bed, and then presented him with her one-time pregnancy. Does that happen? Ajay wondered at the time. It was obvious he wasn't thrilled with the news, but he'd never given up on his marriage to Olivia. Not once did he doubt that Bridget was his daughter. Olivia saw that he loved Bridget more than Daniel. It was understandable. He saw her day in and day out, interacted with her, and she loved him. Sometimes it seemed to Olivia, or maybe it didn't even seem like it, that Bridget loved her father more than he loved her. It made her both happy and a little sad. But mostly, of course, it made her happy. It was a good thing Virginia was dead. No one would ever find out. AJ's getting drunker by the day, and no one listens to his drunken ramblings anymore. Well, Virginia's gone, so the secrets will remain secrets. When were Olivia and Virginia real? And there was no AJ standing between them. Olivia stupidly told her that Bridget wasn't Ajay's daughter, which she regretted. And when she found out about her husband's affair with her friend, she feared exposure. But Virginia kept quiet. Strangely enough, she didn't. Or maybe she'd just forgotten. Though it's hardly the sort of thing one forgets. But Olivia's secret was gone with her friend, and that was good for her. No, Daniel's presence was a little inconvenient. But it was such a small thing compared to what she would keep. Besides, Daniel provided for her financially the pension, the income from her mother's apartment. Her parents from the village tried to give her some money. And then, when Daniel turns 18, then let him move into his mother's apartment and live independently. By that time, Olivia hoped EJ would have already gone to heaven to his beloved, especially since he was so eager to go to her, so drunk. It's just impossible. That's all. No one to share it with. Everything will be left to her and Bridget. Aunt Olivia, I need to brush up on my English, get a tutor. Is that possible? Or I'm going to get in. A B's ruining the whole picture. I can't do it on my own. I need extra credit. As far as I know, chemistry and biology are important for college, not foreign language. How high do you think they're going? That's where they get in. Do you need the money? I don't think I'm aiming too high. Medicine is my thing. I'll do it on my own, Aunt Olivia, without the money. So you're turning me down? I don't know, of course. Maybe all the money goes to support me. Olivia was silent, wondering how she could refuse Daniel. Excuse me, I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, feeling awkward. Is it that there is no money for my son? Ajay intervened in the conversation. He seemed to be sleeping on the couch in the living room, where Olivia was watching TV, and under the influence of the green snake, he seemed to be sound asleep. Turns out he could hear everything. Good for you, son, for striving. You're good. There'll be money. I said it'll come. Ajay gave Olivia an angry look. Lately, Ajay had become aggressive. I guess it was the alcohol, and arguing with a tipsy Ajay was useless. What are you looking at me for? Said Ajay. Dad, don't. I'll ask my grandparents, Daniel said, realizing that he was the cause of an emerging scandal. What grandparents with a living father? And call me father, not dad. Father, that's all you are. Understand, Daniel? Father, Daniel answered, confused. Calm down. We were just talking to Dania, discussing the matter. Didn't you hear me say no? Olivia said. Of course, if you have to, Dania. How many classes a week? I think 2 classes of an hour and a half. All right, go on, Danielle, we need to talk to Daddy. Thank you, Olivia. I really need this class. I told you, Ajay said to Olivia. I'm not a dad. I'm Donnie's dad. Okay, fine. Okay, Dad, Olivia winked at Daniel. As Daniel left to go to his room, EJ continued. Maxime, you demand money for Donnie's classes and you don't work for the man himself. What am I, a printing press? Have you been playing dumb? The money you get for Donnie, you don't spend it all on him. So in the time he's been living with us, I think a decent amount of my money has accumulated. And my labor doesn't count. Did you ask for it? I just don't know why. Maybe you thought you could make a profit off an orphan who was just yelling that he was the father. Olivia whispered. So, Daddy, get your ass up and get to work. Teach your son by example. I'll go and work. Oh, it's fresh in my mind, but I find that hard to believe. How long have you been doing nothing? On indefinite leave. You haven't counted. You're sitting on my neck and opening your mouth. You've got some nerve. I'm not sitting on your neck either. What are you drinking to? You don't know I don't take money from you. And your relatives give you money. It's a one-time job. It's time you got a regular job, Olivia said. When I have to, I will, Ajay replied. Olivia realized that the conversation wasn't going well, but it was a good thing that AJ hadn't completely drank his brains away and was still working. He drank on sprees, and between sprees he made money. He realized that his love of alcohol would not be tolerated at a regular job, so he worked at home, doing term papers for students. And when there were no term papers, he earned money by technical translations. If it weren't for his nerves and alcohol, he could have tutored Daniel in English himself. But no, he couldn't. You have to be able to convey all the linguistic nuances, and that's the prerogative of a teacher, not a technical specialist. When AJ wasn't drinking, he was unbearable. His sullen look, his nagging, especially when Olivia smoked and drank coffee. Whenever he saw Olivia smoking and drinking coffee, he'd start yelling. Sometimes it got to the point where it looked like he was going to hit her. At those moments, Olivia wanted to strangle him, and she probably would have if she'd known she'd get away with it. Aunt Olivia, I'm sorry about the other day. I didn't think Daddy would react so violently. I thought he was asleep and couldn't hear. I wish I'd known. It's okay, I'm used to it, Olivia said lightly so Daniel wouldn't feel guilty. Daddy insists that you call him Daddy. It's the right thing to do. I don't know whether to argue with him or not. Danielle, you know how it ends. Well, if he wants to call me Dad, then call him Dad. What can I do about his drunken ramblings? Maybe you just don't like calling him that. That's a different matter. Then again, he's not going to let you off the hook with his obsession. On the contrary. You know I didn't know my father, and I'm glad my dad wants me to call him Dad. So I'll call him Dad. that made things easier for everyone. From then on, Daniel called AJ Dad, and oddly enough to Olivia too, but AJ tried to live up to that title. He even drank less, and when he didn't drink, he made breakfast for Daniel, as he had for Bridget, and they ate breakfast together. AJ seemed motivated to live. And the whole picture was not to Olivia's liking. She was looking forward to the end. And it turned out to be back to the beginning, and maybe soon, very soon, Daniel would find out that he was really E.J.'s son. For now, you can write it off to EJ's drunken ramblings, but how it will turn out from here on out is unknown. But apparently it was enough for AJ that Daniel called him father. For now. And then Daniel went to the academy, which didn't make Olivia very happy. She wished he'd just go back to his apartment. For so many years she'd had to endure the presence of a child, a mistress, a husband. Not everyone would agree to that. She agreed and even called herself auntie, which she regretted more than once. If Daniel hadn't been in their house, maybe by now EJ would have died of drunkenness. But on the contrary, it was as if EJ was rising from the ashes. No, he hadn't stopped drinking, of course, but it was clear that he was struggling with his illness, albeit weakly. Unwilling, weak-willed EJ fought incredibly. And his binges became less frequent and shorter in duration. He even got better and fresher. He was far from dead, Olivia thought, but there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't poison him like she'd poisoned her husband. Danny, happy birthday, son. You're an adult now, and you're entering adulthood. AJ wept. Don't forget, no matter what happens, we are always with you and will always help you. At the festive table gathered the closest people, Virginia's mother and father, Olivia's mother Bridget, and her husband. For so many years, everyone had gotten used to AJ calling Daniel his son and Daniel AJ his father. Only Olivia won't get used to it. And it's a good thing AJ hasn't completely brain drunk and claimed his true paternity. After all, he does consider the fact that Virginia's parents are still alive and understands that Virginia wouldn't want everyone to know the truth. Honors her memory, Olivia thought. I don't know what I would do without you, Aunt Olivia, without you, Father, without all of you. Thank you for everything. But I can live on my own now. I've made up my mind. I can, Daniel said, seeing his grandmother's frightened look. I can do it. Don't worry about me so much, he smiled at his grandparents. Daniel's right, Olivia said. He's such a self-reliant young man. He came to us, and he knew how to do everything. Thanks to my mom. She taught me everything. Let's drink to Mom, in her memory. Daniel suggested it. She would be happy for me right now and proud of me. A happy memory to Virginia, everyone whispered, except Olivia. They sipped from their glasses and blotted their tears. And I, Danielle, don't agree with you, moving AJ interrupted the silence. What's stopping you from staying here? Have you been unhappy all these years? I'm fine, everyone, thank you. But as they say, it's time to get used to being on your own. You'll forget us in no time. Saddened a tipsy AJ. Who am I supposed to make breakfast for? Who am I going to have breakfast with? Olivia, Daniel answered. AJ looked at Olivia and sighed. Danielle, let me stay with you for a week, clean up, and then I'll take in the tenants, Grandma suggested. I'm going to make repairs in the summer, on vacation, and now just to clean up. Stay, Grandma. Under your careful guidance, I'll put things in order. Are you okay, Grandpa? Permission? Grandma asked. I'll allow it. But only for a week. I need it myself. Grandma smiled, Virginia's father, and everyone laughed. When Daniel came home from class, he found his grandmother with the secretary open and a pile of papers and receipts taken out of it. What's this? Daniel asked. What is it, Daniel? Cried Grandma, raising her eyes to her grandson. Yes, Anushka, these are your old letters. Grandma. So it turns out that AJ is your real father? Daniel asked in a trembling voice. Grandma held out a thick notebook to him with a trembling hand. On the pages were entries made by his mother's hand. This is Mom's diary, Grandma said. Flip through the pages, just as it was written. It appears so, Grandma replied. It's so personal, but you have a right to know the truth, Danielle. You're a big boy. Maybe it's time for everyone to know the truth. Maybe it's not. Grandma said with doubt in her voice. What will happen to everyone when they find out? I can't imagine what will happen to Grandpa. I'm scared. What about Olivia? She raised you for so many years without knowing the truth. What do you think, Danielle? What do we do? I don't know, Grandma. I have no idea, Daniel answered. I'll read the whole diary, and then you and I will decide what to do. You look so pale. How sick are you? Do you need any medicine? I'll take a drink and calm down, and I'll call my grandfather. How he is there, I'll find out, said the grandmother, confused. So it turns out how it was. After reading his mother's diary, Daniel thought, it's not that simple. For obvious reasons, Mom didn't want this to be known. So now what? Should this secret be kept further from my grandmother and me or not? I wonder if my dad knows that my sister didn't know about it before either, judging from my mom's notes. But it's not my secret, and I don't think I should make it public. Who's going to feel better about it? Bridget, Dad, Aunt Olivia, Grandpa. After Mom died, Aunt Olivia became his second mother. It was her choice. So she didn't know that Dad and Mom loved each other and that I was really her husband's son. Because what normal woman would take in the son of her husband's mistress? So if she and Grandma reveal this truth, a lot of good people will suffer. No, we shouldn't do that. Let it go as it is. Life will sort things out. But how he wanted to tell his father the truth, that he knew about their love with his mother, how he wanted his father to know that he, Daniel, knew the truth. Couldn't it be okay to tell his father? Daniel thought. From the lines of the diary, it is clear that my father recognized me as his son. Many questions did not find an answer in Daniel's mind, and he didn't know what the right thing to do was. Between the pages of the diary, he found a photo of his mother and father together. So young and happy they were in the picture. Dad, how much I look like him. I'm just now seeing it, Daniel thought. At first glance, you'd think it was me hugging my mom. Daniel found a suitable photo frame, inserted the picture into it, and set it on his desk. He smiled at the picture of his parents and his thoughts. His mom is gone, but he has his dad, and no one can take that away from him. Grandma, how is Grandpa without you? Didn't you tell him anything? Daniel asked. He only misses me. We were never apart. And now, no, I didn't. What if I had a heart attack, and he's alone there? Grandma, go to him. There's no reason for you to stay here. You looked at me and realized that I'm quite independent. I'll manage. I understand. But my soul still hurts, sighed Grandma. Grandma, stop it. Here, sit here. Daniel sat his grandmother down at the dining table, made tea, poured it into cups, cut a loaf, took out butter, cheese, and sausage from the refrigerator. How am I doing? Smiling, he asked his grandmother. Are you coping? I'm aching for something else. What's going to happen now, Daniel? I'm talking about what you and I found out. Nothing's going to happen. You know my father knows, and I know. And I don't think anyone else needs to know. Grandpa's a heart patient, Mother. Aunt Olivia's old, and I don't think she's in good health either. And Aunt Olivia herself, what if she finds out? I feel sorry for her. Who's going to be happy or healthy, Grandma? No one. Granny sighed. You're so young, Daniel. And how wise you are. Virginia would be happy to see you. So no talking? Silent. Then Daniel agreed. And Bridget, it turns out, is not a Jay's own daughter. Do you think he knows that? Danielle asked. Maybe he already knows that, Grandma. You and I better stay out of it. It's not our secret anymore. I don't think so. And I somehow doubt that I, the old me, I may not understand something, replied Grandma. You said that no one needs such truth. Explain to me, and I agree with you. If I didn't, I might tell someone I shouldn't. Daniel often went to visit his father and Olivia activities. Life and Aunt Olivia didn't like him very much. His father was always happy, even when he was working. He'd put his work aside, set the table, treat him. But Aunt Olivia smoked cigarettes and drank coffee, never sat down at the table with them, and never really kept up a conversation. She'd ask, "How are you?" and that was it. Daniel even felt uncomfortable. He'd lived in their house for so many years, everything was fine, Suddenly it's uncomfortable. "Why are you so glum, Daniel?" his father asked him once as he walked him out the gate of his house. "Are your studies not going well?" "School's fine. You know, Father, when I come to see you in general, I don't feel like Aunt Olivia's happy to see me. It's as if she wants to, but she can't tell me not to come to you. I don't understand. I've lived with you for so many years, and suddenly there's such a change in her attitude toward me." "It's not right for me to discuss my wife with you, son," he said. "But Olivia is a moody person, and if she's in a bad mood, she's not going to hide it. And to be honest, this woman remains a mystery to me. In all the years we've been together, I've never really understood her." "In short, Dad, you come to my place," Daniel suggested. "I just moved into Mom's apartment. You've never been to my place. Come on over, because I don't really feel like I'm at your place. I don't really feel, Dad, I feel a little overweight." "What do you think? Call me, or I might not be home without a call," Daniel said to his father. "You really haven't been to my place. I'll come and see you." Nothing's changed since Virginia's gone. EJ walked around the apartment as if she'd gone out for a minute and was coming back from her memories. Tears came to Ajay's eyes. To keep Daniel from seeing them, he turned to the table and pretended to look at something there. "Is this the table where you study?" "He wasn't exactly here," Ajay said. His heart jumped and froze. Then it pounded so loudly that even Daniel seemed to hear it. Ajay gently took the photo from the table, brought it almost close to his face, shielding the tears from his son with it, and swallowing the lump in his throat, asked, "Did you know, Daniel? And how did you forget to hide the photo?" Daniel was confused at first, but then thought, that's even better. At least he and his father won't have any misunderstandings. "I found out when I moved here. My grandmother was cleaning and found my mom's diary. I got it from the diary. And I didn't tell you. I didn't know whether to speak or not. I mean, the truth could hurt a lot of people." "You're right, son. The truth hurts a lot of people, but lies hurt even more," Ajay replied. "I'm glad you know. Virginia wanted to keep it a secret for the sake of everyone's peace of mind, but as it turns out..." "Dad, let's go to the kitchen. I bought a cake. Would you like some tea? I have a terrible sweet tooth like Virginia. She had a sweet tooth too. Come on, we'll have tea. But there's a lot of things we need to talk about. You're an adult. You should know everything." "Isn't there anything stronger than tea?" Ajay asked. "No, Dad, I don't drink." "Please don't drink it either," Daniel asked. Ajay suddenly jumped up from his chair and hugged his son tightly. My son," he whispered. "I'm sorry for everything." "Dad, come on, Dad." "Forgive me for what?" "I have nothing to forgive you for," Daniel answered, hugging his father. "Yes, there is," said Ajay. "Well, let's go and drink tea. You're kind like your mother. And I was not known for anger. How do you like it, son, stronger? You know I like it strong." "I'm sorry I asked for alcohol," Daniel apologized. "Sometimes I want to get drunk, go to sleep, and never wake up in pain again." "I'm hot tea," Ajay replied. "I can't live without your mom. You're the only thing keeping me afloat. But if you loved each other so much, why didn't you live together? I would have left Olivia. I never loved her." "Yeah, your mom didn't want that," Ajay sighed. "She thought it would hurt a lot of people. She was worried about her parents. How would they take it? Especially since they're neighbors with Olivia's mother. And you realize that now. But Grandma knows now. She found the diary and read it. But we agreed not to tell anyone. We thought the truth would make a lot of people unhappy. Especially Aunt Olivia. That's what Virginia thought, too." Ajay grinned. "Olivia? Yeah, she knew all about us, knew and kept quiet. It was to her advantage," he said bitterly. "Why?" Daniel wondered. "How can you stand it?" "You can't. What about me? How did she put up with me around her for so many years? I have some ideas about that. Olivia's used to being in control, which is why I think you're here. And then she realized that she could hold me back with you. She knew I wouldn't blab to Virginia's memory. You think I don't know that when I asked you to call me father, she chalked it up to my battered brain. In short, Olivia is unpredictable. Well, now your mom's journal has interfered with Olivia's plans besides me. And now you and your grandmother know about it. Who besides Olivia, at this point, is going to be made unhappy by this knowledge? Danielle asked. And Olivia's own mother? She has nothing to do with it. I feel sorry for her, Ajay replied. And Bridget? I guess you know the saying, better the bitter truth than the sweet lie. Don't follow in my footsteps, son, or I'll be in favor of. Lying is not what life is all about. And life doesn't stand still, and mine is about to end. And it turns out that I haven't really lived yet. I've lied, I've dodged and dodged. I'm living with someone I don't love. And it's for the benefit of someone, but not for myself, said EJ with a sigh. Do you think everyone should know the truth? Daniel asked. I do. Yes, everyone, AJ nodded. Can you give me Virginia's diary? At least I want to talk to her so badly. I can, of course, but you'll have to give it back. I'm afraid Aunt Olivia will see it and destroy it, Daniel replied, handing it to his father. I did, son, but promise me that when I divorce Olivia, you'll give it back to me for good, AJ asked. What are you doing? Yeah, I was going to divorce her, but she thinks it's my drunken ramblings. This time I'm going to file for divorce and property division. It's about time you took my last name and legalized my paternity. Let's formalize paternity first, change your last name, and then I'll file for divorce, he suggested. I'd be happy to have your last name, father. But there's more secrets. It's the right thing to do, Danielle. Because Olivia is an unpredictable person. She can do all sorts of things, Ajay chuckled. She's a Medea. Oh, really, Dad? Really, Olivia? No, why would you do that? Daniel got worried. Oh, son, you don't know women. They're the cause of all our troubles. And they make us weak. That's right. I'm kidding, Ajay laughed. But it's time for me to go. The cake is delicious, by the way. I'll bring cake next time I come over. Give me Mom's diary. Just wrap it up in a bag, put it in a bag, because I don't have a bag. Well, his father left, and Daniel felt light and happy. Soon he would have his father's last name. He looked at the picture of his parents and saw several bills of money next to it. His father planted it, Daniel said aloud, and smiled. Not believing his eyes, he read the note several times. Vika said Bridget is not Ajay's daughter. I thought she was joking. He even told her it wasn't April 1st and her kind of joke wouldn't fly. It's not a joke, she said. Really, that Virginia still wonders how he didn't get it. Bridget is a copy of her father, Mishka. She is a copy of her father's character. It's a little tough for a girl, but you need that nowadays. It's a time of tough people and grip and tact. My dear friend, do you think all men know who they're raising their own or other men's children? This woman knows who the child is from, and a man can either believe it or not. No, Olivia's not kidding. I don't know why she told me that. Maybe she couldn't bear to keep it to herself. No, of course not. I'm not going to tell Ajay. I don't want to hurt him. Besides, he loves Bridget. Not the kind of father who doesn't even know about his daughter. The kind of father who raised her. Ajay tensed up, his head thudding and pain echoing in his chest area. Bridget, not his daughter. No, he'd never compared her to anyone she looked or didn't look like. He was just sure she was his daughter. Anger swept over Ajay. Olivia had bound him to her. He'd put up with her all his life for Bridget's sake, loved someone else, and tolerated Olivia, even when she annoyed him to the point where he wanted to strangle her. He had. Bridget was always a light in the window for him. He was distracted by his daughter and forgave Olivia her dislike for him. And she, knowing he loved Virginia, forgave his dislike for her. That was how they lived in dislike. Before he went down to the kitchen where Olivia was, he breathed deeply, letting out the anger and all the demons that were pushing him to deal with Olivia. And when he had more or less calmed down, he left the room. You ready to go? AJ asked sharply. 5 more minutes, and everything will be ready, Olivia answered. Are you hungry? Olivia looked at him, smiled, and turned away to slice bread. Ajay seemed strange to her, confused and tense at the same time. Probably work problems again, she thought, and sighed. Bridget's not my daughter, Ajay said, sitting down at the table, and keeping his eyes on Olivia. Olivia shuddered and tensed. Someone else might not have noticed it, but he'd learned every gesture she'd made over the years. He'd caught her off guard with his question. She didn't know whether to lie or tell the truth. "Why aren't you saying anything, Olivia?" "I asked you a question," AJ asked calmly. He calmed the storm that was brewing inside him as he read over and over the paragraph in the diary that said he wasn't the father of his daughter. Olivia tossed the knife she'd been cutting bread with and turned sharply toward AJ. No, he couldn't read the fear in her face. It was more like triumph. She raised her head proudly and looked up at him, smiling. "Well, yes, Bridget is not yours. So now what? I'm wondering how you know that." "Virginia knew, and no one else knew. And you kept quiet all this time, and now you want to find out." Olivia wondered. "What's the point of all this fighting now?" "No, I didn't. I just found out. You lied, and it ruined your life." "Oh, come on, don't be so hard on yourself," Olivia snorted. Virginia had told it in her diary and revealed the secret. "So now you're going to give up on Bridget?" "No, I'm not. I raised Bridget, so she's my daughter and my grandchildren. But when I think that I could have had a different life, a happy life with the woman I love, and because of your lies I missed her, I squeezed her out. But with the woman I love, I would have lived." "Don't forget that you met your beloved thanks to me." Olivia smiled. "You'd never see your beloved again." "Where would you have met her?" "In a village you didn't even know the name of." "I'm a fool. What is this?" The snake was pulled out of the wilderness by a friend, the mother of her friends, Virginia. I felt sorry for her, and she returned the favor by being ungrateful. "I don't want Bridget to know that I'm not her family," Olivia realized. "That's all I want from you for now, and I won't. I know she loves you. Sometimes I think she loves you more than she loves me. And her kids adore you. What kind of evil am I, ruining all this?" "So Thomas didn't want to marry you. Are you trying to trick me? He didn't even know Bridget was his daughter. I knew even then that Thomas wouldn't make a husband or a father. He's a fickle man, not a husband. That's why I didn't tell him anything and decided to make you both husband and father." "Oh, Olivia, you're so full of it. What's the point of rehashing old times, AJ? We've lived our lives. And you were no angel, upsetting me with your friends and your antics. I raised your kid, you raised mine, and I've seen enough of your drinking. The debts are mine. What's the point of all this litigation now? As they say, you don't change horses at the crossroads. And you and I are already at an advanced age. Or is there something on your mind?" Olivia turned on the coffee machine and lit a cigarette. "Are we going already? Why is that smoke stinking up the place?" Ajay asked unhappily. Olivia put out her cigarette, turned off the machine, and began to set the table. "Olivia, I don't get it. For 8 years, Daniel had lived with us, and you treated him like a son? I respected you for it. What's different now? It's like you don't want him to come to us. When he lived here, I was more relaxed. Now it seems like he's coming for you, to take you away." Ajay laughed. "Where? Nowhere. Where? Take you away from me, from our house. We didn't love each other and we don't love each other, but still. And tell me, do you believe that those who loved in their youth, after living such a long life as you and me, continue to love each other?" "I don't know. I haven't lived with my beloved," answered Ajay. "And I know a few who have kept love, and the rest are like us, living out of habit. Again, children and grandchildren bind them. And you know what to expect from the one you live with? You're probably right. I think I'm probably right. What do you got there? Can't get enough of the good stuff?" "Lamb stew?" Olivia replied. "You're a good cook, that's for sure." Ajay moved his plate over to her. "They say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. That's not true. I didn't reach your heart with my sincerity. Well, maybe it's not too late. Maybe I will." Flirtatiously looked at her husband, Olivia. "I took the joke," smiled Ajay. "And I'm not joking. I do not want to spend my old age alone, even though we live without love, but habit is a serious matter. I know that you are up there, upstairs, strictly teaching your translations, that I should prepare food. Our grandchildren come and enjoy us, and we enjoy them. If all this is ruined, how can we live again? It's too late, AJ, it's too late. And you're going to be alone. The kids have their own lives. It'll just be the two of us. Or do you think you'll meet another one like Virginia? You won't. There'll always be new people to compare her to. And she'll make the others pale in comparison. It's a long shot, Ajay. It's not the right age. Think about what I told you. Think hard. Have you noticed that we haven't really talked to each other in the last few years? Ajay asked. And today, what I found out today set us off on a revelation. We talked, and it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Ajay smiled. Bridget's pushing us toward each other again. Or is it just some kind of obsession? You women know how to work your magic, don't you? An hour ago, I was ready to kill you. And yesterday, I wanted to divorce you, Ajay smiled. I guess the stew does have that effect on me. And now what? What now? Olivia looked at him anxiously, her hand reaching for her cigarette. Now, I don't know. I don't know anything, Ajay replied. I know Olivia turned on the coffee machine. You don't have to break what you already have. If you promise that you won't divorce me, won't walk away from me at the sight of bread, tea, and coffee, then I'll accept you like family. And please, Ajay, stop drinking. Stop drinking. You can stop drinking. I know you're strong. Is he strong? She really thinks so. Ajay was surprised at his wife's words. She always thought he was weak. Now all of a sudden. Or is this another one of Olivia's tricks? And you stop drinking liters of coffee and smoking, said Ajay. Can I not smoke? Yes, you can. When I'm nervous, that's when I reach for a cigarette. You can drink coffee, but if you drink a little, you can't drink too much in your heart, said Ajay, smiling. Daniel knows I'm his father. He got it from Virginia's diary, Ajay said. Olivia shuddered. I'm going to give him my last name. I wanted to keep it a secret from you. But you blabbed, Ajay continued. Then everyone will know. Almost everyone knows. Then he'll claim our house. That's right. Bridget is the heiress, and Bridget is our daughter, and Daniel is our son. I don't want to lose the house. Olivia's lips quivered and she cried. I've put so much effort into it. I want to live in it until the end, until my end. I feel it as mine. And the house feels it. I've grown into it. So who's chasing you out of it? You want to divorce me? Which means if anything happens to you, Danielle's going to want a piece of it. My house would be torn apart. Olivia wouldn't stop crying, which means I'd be torn apart. She finished one cigarette, but she should have smoked another. Her hands were shaking, her voice was breaking, and he looked at her, her shoulders were shaking. But on her tired and already not young face, and he felt incredibly sorry for her. He caught himself that in all his life he had never once pitied her. And she had never cried. Never. And now Olivia and he, Ajay, were getting weaker. Ajay realized she needed him. And he needs her. Need her, strangely enough. And not just because he suddenly felt love. Pity is stronger than love. He just realized that now. He went to her, took the cigarette from her hands, put it out and hugged her. The one he had been ready to kill an hour earlier. Don't cry, Kiran, don't cry. Everything will be all right. No one will ever kick you out of this house. We'll just make a will for each other, and if either of us dies. Anyway, is that any way you believe me? Not stopping crying. Olivia nodded affirmatively and hugged Ajay. Will you forgive me? She asked Ajay. There's nothing to forgive, Bridget. My daughter, Ajay replied. Olivia just said he was strong. She was wrong. He's weak in front of women, in front of their tears, weak. Women have a way of making men weak. How do they do it? Ajay thought, holding Olivia in his arms.